Chapter 303. The little white dog was very obedient and adorable. It looked at Ning Ke innocently with its watery eyes. Ning Ke stared at it blankly as countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Suddenly, the little white dog's watery eyes revealed a hint of pride. It opened its mouth abruptly and revealed its short but sharp teeth. It bit at Ning Ke's wrist with such force that it seemed like it was going to bite off his hand. The innocent and adorable little white dog had turned into a ferocious and terrifying wolf cub in the next moment. It bit at Ning Ke's wrist at an extremely fast speed, especially when it closed its teeth. It was so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. It was almost as fast as lightning. If Ning Ke was bitten, his flesh and bones would definitely be broken. This sudden attack was insidious and sudden. If it was an ordinary person, they would not be able to escape the lightning-fast bite. However, Ning Ke had been dealing with dangerous prey all his life. He was the most sensitive to the movements of these beasts and the most alert to the dangers in the forest. How could he fall for this trick? When his fingertips touched the dog's neck, he felt a slight buildup of strength. He reacted and shoved his right hand into the little white dog's mouth. Then, he mercilessly went in, as if he wanted to shove his entire arm into the little white dog's stomach. Then, his fingers found a soft piece of meat in the sticky mess and pinched hard. The little white dog let out a stifled howl. Everything from its mouth to its throat was stuffed, leaving no space for it to move. How could it still bite down? The intense pain in the depths of its throat caused its round body to tremble violently. Saliva dripped from the corners of its mouth, making it look extremely pitiful. Ning Ke raised his left hand in the air and shook his head at the drooling little white dog whose eyes were already red from fighting. He had hunted countless beasts in Min Mountain and encountered countless dangers. However, he was forced to use such a risky move when his prey was so close to his mouth. He had only used it once when he met the wolf pack when he was young. Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu looked away from the snow-capped peak and were shocked by the scene. Ning Ke raised his arm high with a little white dog dangling from the tip of his arm. Half of his arm was completely submerged in the little white dog's mouth. It looked like he was holding a white torch, or an iron rod piercing through his prey and preparing to roast it. The prey was still alive and drooling, so the scene was a little ridiculous. Where did the dog come from? Mo Shanshan asked with a slight frown. I don't know either. Ning Ke looked up at the little white dog in front of his arm. The wet and sticky feeling on his arm did not move him at all. He looked at the pitiful and struggling expression in its eyes and could not help but be slightly moved. He felt that this little thing seemed to be able to understand human nature, just like the big black horse or the big white goose second brother raised. Yi Hongyu looked at the snow-white puppy warily but did not say anything. Ning Ke looked at the snow-white fur of the little white dog and thought of something. He sighed and said, I have always wanted to raise a beautiful Samoyed, but never had the chance. I didn't expect to meet you. Mo Shanshan did not understand what a Samoyed was, but she could not help but sympathize with Ning Ke for being too cruel when she saw the little white dog kicking its hind legs in pain and drooling. She said, then raise it. Yi Hongyu laughed coldly and pinched a Taoist formula behind her back. She looked indifferently at the back of the mountain path. Ning Ke used his empty left hand to rub the head of the little white dog and found that he felt a familiar and intimate aura from it. He could not help but frown. He thought to himself that youngest uncle's legacy was in the front gate of the devil's doctrine, so he felt close and familiar. But what was with this dog? Could it be youngest uncle's pet? There was a human arm in its mouth, and its stomach could even taste human flesh, but it couldn't bite it down. It couldn't even lick it to satisfy its craving. The little white dog was in extreme pain, and the soft piece of flesh that was pinched deep in its throat made it feel an extreme sense of fear and obedience. The little white dog looked at Ning Ke with its watery eyes, showing signs of begging and submission. It did not mind submitting to this human's aura. As for the reason why its eyes were so watery, it was because it was in too much pain. Don't look at me like that, it will make me struggle. Ning Ke looked at the little white dog and sighed. Although I really want to raise a Samoyed, and you have also expressed your willingness to be adopted by me, I can only say that Haotian's fated chance is too cruel. I am too hungry now, and in my eyes, you are more like a pot of fragrant dog meat. He used his left hand to pull out the padao from the scabbard and held it in his mouth, preparing to kill the dog and disembowel it. He continued to comfort it with a muffled voice, eating is more important than Haotian. If someone like Master Lotus wants to live, he has to eat human flesh every day, so what if we eat a few pieces of dog meat? He suddenly remembered that this seemingly cute little thing was the easiest to deceive young girls. He had forgotten to ask for the two girls' opinions. He took down the padao with one hand and held the dog with the other, saying, "We need live food." Mo Shanshan could not bear to watch and turned around. Yi Hongyu's eyes flashed with excitement and asked, "Do you do this often?" Ning Ke waved the padao and said proudly, "Don't talk about killing dogs, I got tired of eating wolves in Min Mountain." When the little white dog that was suspended in his hand heard this, it realized that this fellow was actually a bloodthirsty pervert who dared to eat wolf meat. It was instantly scared out of its wits and lost its last hope. Its soft body stiffened like a block of wood. Ning Ke did not care whether the little white dog was as gentle as a cat or as stiff as a rock. He had eaten everything in his life, and he did not believe in the idiotic theory that prey would secrete poison to make the meat unpalatable due to fear before it died. He picked up the padao and started to skim the little white dog's head. After all, Sang Sang did not like him killing cubs after he killed the old hunter, so he needed to familiarize himself with the physiological structure of the other party. At this moment, an extremely angry roar suddenly sounded from the rope that was hidden behind the thin fog. Because of the long distance and the rapid approach of the voice, the clear and angry voice was compressed into an even sharper voice. "Who dare move me of?" When the clear and angry voice sounded, it was obvious that the person was still far away in the depths of the valley. When the word "move" was said, the person was already in the clouds diagonally above them. When the word "of" was said, the person was already very close to the three people on the ground. The clouds were disturbed and a large area was broken in an instant. Then, like a stone falling from the sky, a figure jumped down from the rope diagonally above and jumped towards Ning Ke's position. Ning Ke carried the little white dog and looked back into the fog. He looked at the graceful figure that was so fast that it did not seem like a mortal. He was stunned and thought, could a fairy really fall from the sky? However, when the old leather boot expanded rapidly in his field of vision and approached his face with the terrifying sound of the wind, he finally understood that it was not a fairy that fell from the sky, but someone who wanted to kill him. There was a whistling sound of a sword. Yi Hongyu had been on guard against the appearance of the person and had secretly accumulated her psyche power for a long time. Just as the figure was about to hit Ning Ke, she released the Taoist formula and an invisible sword style pierced towards the figure. The person who jumped down from the fog snorted and made a cross with his fists in front of him. He had actually used his own body to forcefully block Yi Hongyu's sword that she had been preparing for a long time. His body suddenly somersaulted a dozen times and then landed heavily on the ground. With a muffled hum, the valley was filled with dust and dust. The dust gradually settled and the figure of the person was revealed. It was a little girl wearing a fur coat. She wore an animal skin hat on her head and a beast's tail was wrapped around her collar. Judging from her figure and the exposed eyes, she was definitely still very young. Two extremely long black braids hung down behind her and swayed gently. She knelt on the ground on one knee and there was a deep pit on her knee. However, there was no pain on her face. Both her knee and her petite body were as stable as a mountain and it was impossible to tell whether she was injured or not. The little white dog in Ning Ke's hand struggled violently the moment it saw the little girl. Ning Ke did not have the patience to pay attention to it at this moment and shook it hard a few times, almost causing it to roll its eyes. He focused all his attention on the little girl who knelt on the ground on one knee and was dumbfounded by what he saw. He could not understand how someone in this world dared to jump from such a high place and use her arms to block Yi Hongyu's sword and fall to the ground pathetically without any injury. After a while, the little girl stood up. Her two thick and long black braids swayed again with her movements. She looked at Yi Hongyu and her clear eyes that were not covered by the beast's tail revealed a shocked and puzzled expression. "What happened to you in the front gate? How did your power drop so much? I clearly saw that you had entered the knowing destiny state on the snow cliff. Why are you only at the see-through state now?" Yi Hongyu's face was slightly pale and her lips curled into a self-mocking smile. However, she did not answer the other party's question. Ning Ke glanced at her. He had many doubts during the painful battle with Master Lotus in the Devil's Hall and had vaguely guessed a possibility. It was only now that he had received confirmation from the little girl. He could not help but be shocked as he finally understood that Yi Hongyu had paid such a painful price. Positive emotions such as shock, gratitude and admiration had never stayed in his mind for too long. Ning Ke could tell that the little girl who had fallen from the sky obviously had a grudge against the Tao addict. Naturally, he would not stand at the front and bear the brunt. He silently walked behind Yi Hongyu. His movements were so casual and natural that it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Yi Hongyu looked at the little girl indifferently and said to the two people beside her, "This demoness from the Devil's Doctrine is called Tang Xiaotang. Don't think that she is easy to deal with just because she is young. If the Devil's Doctrine had not been destroyed back then, she would have been the saintess of this generation. This girl does not dare to fight with me face to face. She is very cunning." Tang Xiaotang was already angry when she heard her mention the pursuit in the Tianqi Mountains. She retorted angrily, "If you did not use those dirty tricks, I would have fought with you." Yi Hongyu smiled slightly and did not want to continue the discussion. However, this attitude made Tang Xiaotang feel even more angry and unfair. The little girl's face that was exposed outside the beast's tail started to blush. Ning Ke had heard that the other party was the demoness from the Devil's Doctrine. However, he did not think that there was anything demonic about her except for her demonic abilities. Looking at the little girl's blushing face, innocent eyes and long black braids, he suddenly felt that he had heard someone describe such a girl before. However, he could not remember where. The situation on the monthly votes list is a little tense. If you have extra monthly votes in your account, please support us. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 304. This title doesn't mean that I'm not a serious person. I never do serious things. It's just that the things I'm going to talk about today are more serious. First of all, the simplified version of Shoegaze had been officially published. Moreover, it had started to be widely distributed. Of course, those who had read it would know that it was a very good novel. If everyone wanted to read it on paper, they might as well buy the original version. Those who haven't read it should subscribe to the electronic version first. Then buy the original version and read it in bed. I'm a serious person who never lies. It's really good. The Xinhua bookstores should be putting it on the shelves now. Dangdangzhuiyue and Taobao have also officially started selling it. When I have some time in a few days, I'll sort it out. I'll post it in the book review section or a single chapter. It's actually very easy to search for it. I know that many readers have already gotten the first episode of Rising Tide. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude and remind everyone to make sure that it's published by Wuhan Publishing House. Don't buy pirated copies. Also, don't forget to give it 5 stars and give it a good review. Don't worry, Taiwanese friends. Rising Tide will be released soon. I'll show off then. Then, about the time. Tomorrow is Saturday. I'll keep my good tradition and take a vacation. Don't sigh and laugh at me. I'm not the kind of person who has to show off. I'll take a day off tomorrow. In fact, I'll have to write at night. I'll return to Hubei the day after tomorrow, which is the 6th. I won't be able to write if I'm delayed on the road. I'll be very busy these days to ensure that there will be more updates on the 7th. I'll do my best to write. If I can't, I'll let everyone know. I'm most worried about the cat and dog. I'll entrust the dog to my friend, Dr. Jiang. I'll also entrust him to feed the cat at home every 2 days. It seems that Little Black's weight loss plan is within reach. I'll thank him here. My leader can only stay in Hubei for 3 days. It's very tiring. I'm sure she'll be exhausted. Her plan, for my annual party and work, she'll have to put in a lot of effort. I'll thank her here. Let me thank you very seriously. In the past, I loved and wanted to avoid the monthly votes list. One of the reasons was that this matter could easily cause gossip and unhappiness. However, my dears have voted so many monthly votes. You are as nervous as I am, but you are so gentle and lovely that you do not criticize other books and authors. It wasn't easy to keep my emotions in a state of excitement and moderation. Of course, I also have to thank the other book friends. No matter if it's the fatty ear root, the Shota tomato, or the Uncle Moon Gate, they're all so gentle and considerate to me. I blew a kiss. Thank you, everyone. I hope that no matter what happens to the votes, we can still be happy. Let us go on living decently, not decently. Let us all go on writing seriously, and reading irregularly. Finally, let me say something serious, I'm trying to get monthly votes. If you still have monthly votes, please vote for Nightfall. Right now, both I and this book need your support. The fat but not lazy serious cat waved his paw and saluted. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. More importantly, it was because of the stories that Master Lotus told and what he had done. It made him feel an inexplicable fear towards the devil's doctrine. Even if he had joined the devil, it did not mean that he would naturally be close to the people from the devil's doctrine. It was just like how youngest uncle joined the devil's doctrine in the past, but he still destroyed the front gate of the devil's doctrine. Seeing that Tang Xiaotang was about to speak, Ning Ke gradually relaxed, but his body was still tense. He subconsciously clenched his right hand behind his back, but he forgot that his right hand was stuffed into the little white dog's throat. His fingers tightened, and the little white dog suddenly felt as if it had been struck by lightning, struggling in letting out a weak whine. Tang Xiaotang, who was about to leave, was startled when she heard the weak and miserable cry of a dying person calling for their loved ones. Then, she came back to her senses and hit her head in annoyance. She thought that she must have fallen too hard just now and was confused. She almost forgot why she took the risk to jump down. She looked at the three of them and said while suppressing her anger, "Return Little White to me, and I will leave." Yi Hongyu looked back at Ning Ke expressionlessly and then walked to the side. Ning Ke glared at her and raised his right hand. He looked at Tang Xiaotang and said, "Is this your dog? No wonder it's so cute. I was wondering how there could be such a dog in such a remote valley. So it's the sacred dog of the devil's doctrine." The little white dog looked miserable when it was raised into the air. Its mouth was wide open, and saliva mixed with blood dripped from it. Its abdomen rose and fell slightly, and it looked at its owner pitifully and helplessly. Its eyes had turned red from the struggle. Tang Xiaotang looked at it. How could she still listen to Ning Ke's flattery? Her clear eyes were filled with endless anger, and then gradually turned red. A strong wind blew, and a heavy sound of impact was heard. Smoke and dust gradually fell. Tang Xiaotang glared at Ning Ke, who was leaning against the smooth stone surface of the valley, and shouted angrily, "I'm going to kill you." Ning Kei's arm was in so much pain that he could not lift it. He did not know how many pieces of his bones had been smashed by the little girl's fist. At this moment, he finally believed Yi Hongyu's words. This siren from the devil's doctrine was indeed terrifying. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He looked at Tang Xiaotang and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I gave in to you, so we're even. If you still want to fight, don't blame me for being rude. Is the Enlightenment doctrine that great? I'm the successor of the headmaster of the academy." So he looked at the girl from the devil's doctrine and said sincerely, "The most important thing is to be happy. I can understand your anger, but I hope that you can understand my injustice." He continued, "Although your dog was a little frightened, I can guarantee that it did not lose a piece of meat. I will put it down and return it to you now. I hope that you will not be hot-headed again, okay?" Tang Xiaotang looked at the little thing in his hand and could not care so much anymore. She nodded hurriedly. Ning Kei pulled his hand out of the little white dog's mouth and handed it over. Tang Xiaotang hugged Little White happily and kept stroking its white fur to comfort it. Little White rubbed against her cheeks weakly and then buried its head in the little girl's soft arms that had just started to develop. Ning Kei took a few steps back and praised, "What a cute little dog." Tang Xiaotang explained seriously, "Little White is a snow wolf, not a little dog." Ning Kei suddenly understood and said, "So it is a little white wolf." At this moment, the little white wolf in the arms of the girl from the devil's doctrine secretly looked up at him. Its eyes were extremely vicious, as if it was saying that it would bite Ning Kei to death if there was a chance in the future. It is indeed a wolf cub. Ning Kei thought hatefully in his heart. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely throw this wolf cub into the back of the mountain of the academy and let it have a taste of second brother's big white goose. Before Tang Xiaotang left, she said to the three of them, "Even though there is only one path to leave the Holy Land, this valley was excavated by the previous sages of the Enlightenment doctrine. Thus, a few maze formations have been set up. Recently, there has been a lot of fog. When you go out, be careful. If you get lost, you may not be able to walk out." Mo Shanshan calmly bowed and said, "Thank you for your reminder." If it was in the past, the young talisman master would definitely not hesitate to fight with the remaining evil of the devil's doctrine, especially such an important demoness. However, after coming from the great river kingdom in the south to the wilderness in the north and walking with Ning Kei for such a long time, especially after experiencing the matter of Master Lotus, she had a lot of new understanding of the difference between the devil's doctrine and Taoism. Naturally, she would not view things as she did in the past. Tang Xiaotang said, "You are welcome. I just want to make this guy feel bad." That guy was naturally referring to Ning Quebec. He smiled and said, "Why don't we go together?" Tang Xiaotang looked at him and said proudly, "You always say that the Enlightenment doctrine is the devil's doctrine and that Taoism and the devil's doctrine are irreconcilable. Why do you want me to take you away now? I want you to beg me." "Why don't you beg me?" Ning Kei said righteously, "What are you talking about?" Chapter 306. The first sentence completely ignored the thousand-year history of the bloody war between Taoism and the devil's doctrine, and even ignored the fact that the devil's doctrine was destroyed by Mr. Ku of the academy. It was already extremely shameless, but it seemed to make some sense. Moreover, Ning Kei looked righteous and could still maintain the demeanor of a disciple of the academy. However, the next sentence that followed after the awe-inspiring righteousness was so direct and straightforward. He asked for it without any hesitation or concealment. It was really shameless to the extreme. Tang Xiaotang looked at Ning Kei blankly. She did not expect that he would really beg her. She was even a little dazed. Was what her brother said true? Was he really a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy? Even Mo Shanshan, who already knew Ning Kei's temperament very well, felt a little hot on her face. She stood a little further away from Ning Kei with a trace of shame in her eyes. Yi Hongyu shook her head in disgust. As the only unknown place that connected the human world and the outside world, the academy was such a proud place. From the headmaster of the academy to Mr. Ko to Jun Mo, who would really look up to the devil's doctrine. Ning Ke was shameless enough to lie through his teeth. It seemed that the academy's education without discrimination was not just a legend. Actually, Ning Ke did not need the girl from the devil's doctrine to lead him out of the Tianxi Mountains. With the incomprehensible aura and fragments left behind by Master Lotus, he might be able to follow his intuition and walk out. He had used this method to bring Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu out of the devil's doctrine. However, he did not want to try again, because finding the right path in those deep passages could be attributed to luck, but if he was lucky too many times, it would easily arouse suspicion. "Miss Tang, where are you going?" Ning Ke asked. Tang Xiaotang replied, "I'm going south." The south was a very broad concept, especially since they were in the bitterly cold Tianxi Mountains in the extreme north of the continent. No matter where they wanted to go, it seemed that they had to go south first. However, Tang Xiaotang spoke very seriously, and so did Ning Quebec. He even followed her words and spoke his own thoughts. What a coincidence, we're also going south. So we're going the same way. As the saying goes, a chance encounter is better than an invitation. Shall we go together? The passageways leading to the outside of the mountains were stone valleys that were dug out by the masters of the devil's doctrine countless years ago. The stone walls were smooth and steep as if they were cut by a knife. Even an eagle would not be able to stop. No one knew how many years of wind, frost, rain, and snow had passed, but there was still no dust, so it was naturally impossible for there to be lush green grass. The Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace, the young girl of the devil's doctrine, the calligraphy addict of Mogan Mountain, and the weakest world wayfarer in the history of the academy. The four of them walked silently in the narrow and long stone valley. Silence was not the right word. In my opinion, we, the young generation of the cultivation world, cannot repeat the mistakes of our seniors. Mo Shanshan's expression turned solemn as she asked, "What mistakes? Fighting as soon as we meet? What's the point of fighting? When I'm free, I'll hide in the mountains and cultivate. If I see him, I'll just greet him and chat. Isn't that better than anything else?" Yi Hongyu said coldly, "No fighting, no cultivation. I've always opposed this view, but I won't argue with a cultivation addict like you. If I have the chance to go to Chang'an in the future, I'll treat you 3 to noodles." Noodles with fried eggs cooked by Sang Sang. Tang Xiaotang looked at his profile curiously and asked, "Who's Sang Sang?" "Sang Sang is my little handmaiden. You should know that the noodles made by Sang Sang are absolutely the best noodles in the world." Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Ke's haggard face, but when he mentioned a certain name, he would be in high spirits. She smiled slightly and did not say anything. However, she did not know why she felt a little empty in her heart and a little uneasy. Ning Ke looked at Tang Xiaotang and said seriously, "Even if we want to fight, let's not fight now. It'll be more magnificent if we fight outside. Speaking of which, in fact, my hatred for the West Hill Divine Palace is very deep, no less than yours." Speaking of this, he lowered his voice and looked at Yi Hongyu's back in front of him. He said, "Does Prince Long Qing know?" Tang Xiaotang was infected by his expression and her voice came out from the beast's tail. She whispered, "I know. I saw you shoot through him with 1 arrow. Your arrow is really powerful. You can still hit someone from so far away." Ning Ke said sincerely, "It's not as powerful as the Enlightenment Doctrine skills. How dare you jump from such a high place?" Tang Xiaotang lowered her head shyly and said softly, "I was also confused at that time." Ning Ke pointed at Yi Hongyu's back and whispered, "Prince Long Qing was disabled by me. There's no reason for the West Hill Divine Palace not to take revenge on me. In fact, this woman has always wanted to kill me. However, I made an agreement with her in the Holy Land that we would only do it outside. So if we really fight outside the mountain, I can help you." Although he spoke softly, he did not deliberately hide it from anyone. After all, they were walking together in this secluded valley. There was no time for them to make any conspiracy or play the art of coordination. Yi Hongyu, who was walking in front, stopped and looked back at him. She said with slight anger, "Ning Ke, can you shut up? I really feel bad for the headmaster of the academy to accept you as a disciple. I'm sure that you will become the shame of the academy in the future." "There's no need for the future. I'm already the shame of the academy." Ning Ke answered with a smile. He was telling the truth. After the inexplicable fight with the Xie family of the South Jin Kingdom, he was ostracized and ignored by his fellow students in the academy for several months. He did not know how many times they had whispered about the shame of the academy. He had long learned to ignore it. Moreover, he never thought that it was a derogatory term. He was willing to do anything as long as he could keep Sang Sang alive. Since that was the case, it was no big deal for him to say some witty words to please the girl who was the most powerful among the four of them, and who did not seem to care about the academy and the headmaster of the academy. She was the girl from the Devil's Doctrine, who did not seem to care about the academy and the headmaster of the academy. As long as he wanted to, he could make all the soldiers and civilians in the city of Wei, Master Yen Sei, and His Majesty happy. Therefore, the girl from the Devil's Doctrine, Tang Xiaotang, was not surprised to be happy and laughed from time to time. "So you are the sister of the legendary Tang. It's an honor to meet you." Ning Ke recalled what Chen Pipi said on the first day in the back of the mountain of the academy. He was slightly shocked and then remembered more things, such as Chen Pipi's description of his dream lover. Therefore, he found that the girl from the Devil's Doctrine beside him looked more and more familiar. Except for her young age, she fit Chen Pipi's description perfectly. "Since you're going to the south, you should really go to Chang'an. It has nothing to do with the fried egg noodle I mentioned earlier. It's the most magnificent city in the world and there are many interesting people living there. One of them I want to introduce to you. He's about the same age as me, but he entered the knowing destiny state a few years ago. Everyone says he's a real genius." Tang Xiaotang looked at Ning Ke with her clear eyes and said in surprise, "He entered the knowing destiny state at such a young age? Is there really such a person in the world? Is he more powerful than the Tao addict?" Hearing this, Yi Hongyu suddenly said, "That fatty's temperament is terrible, but his cultivation speed is extremely fast. It can only be said that Haotian is biased toward some people. If we really fight, he's no match for you." After a short pause, she looked at Ning Ke and asked, "How is he doing in the academy these years?" Ning Ke then remembered that Chen Pipi knew the Tao addict and that every time this person was mentioned, the proud fatty would be scared like a quail. He scratched his head and answered, "Not bad." Hearing this answer, Yi Hongyu was silent for a long time and then said indifferently, "That's good." The four of them walked in the quiet and even a little dead stone valley. They were the most outstanding young people in the cultivation world. They came from different sects, had different ideologies, and even had deep hatred for each other. However, there was no bloody fight or intrigue. Perhaps it was because they had seen too much blood and conspiracy in front of the old monk in the depths of the snow-capped peak, or simply because they did not want to think about it on the way home because their youth was their companion. Youth was really a very beautiful thing. Whether they were obsessed with books, Taoism, power or money, they still retained some simple and pure parts of themselves and did not completely sink into the complicated affairs of the world like a quagmire. If there was only youth left in the world, no old and no decay, perhaps there would be fewer killings and disputes. If they were hot-blooded instead of cold-blooded, they would still fight but directly. Then the world would become much simpler and more beautiful. However, it was a pity that everyone would gradually grow old and become more worldly. There would be many more responsibilities on their shoulders, and those heavy responsibilities would make people bend their backs. It would make people diligent in thinking but too lazy to feel. At the southernmost end of the vast Tianqi mountain, the gradually lower mountain range penetrated into the wilderness and then disappeared into the flat land north of the Hulun Sea. The caravan from the Central Plains had stayed here for a long time. The lake was almost completely frozen, but they still had no intention of leaving. The middle-aged man slowly raised the edge of his tall hat and looked at the distant snow-capped peak in the sky. He felt that there were people there. Were they from the Taoist temple? Logically speaking, when the Taming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane appeared in the world, Haotian Taoism would not only send the young disciples like the Tao addict and Long Qing, hoping to snatch the tomes of arcane back. However, except for himself and the guy who was hiding somewhere in the world to cultivate 23-year cicada cultivation, who else knew that the only exit after the Holy Land was sealed was in the north of the Hulun Sea? However, even if the Taoist temple sent a world wayfarer, he would not stop his plan. It was because he had been swinging back and forth between the Empire and the West Hill for too many years. He hated this feeling, so he decided to do something. As long as he had the tomes of arcane, he could get real freedom. As one of the few powerful descendants of the devil's doctrine in the world, the middle-aged man firmly believed in this legend. Is it you who likes to carry a wooden sword? The middle-aged man looked at the distant snow-capped peak and smiled contemptuously. He put the remaining half of the lamb leg back on the plate, took a silk handkerchief from his subordinate, and carefully wiped the oil stains between his fingers. Then he stood up. The soles of his shoes stepped on the freshly frozen lake of the Hulun Sea. The middle-aged man slowly walked toward the distant mountains across the lake. Every step he took was so solid that it seemed that he was going to shake the ice. He had many enemies in the world, and those enemies all knew that he did not know how to swim or even feared water. But today, he had to step over the lake, as if he wanted to break through the grievances and dissatisfaction of the past years. The cold wind blew on his chest, and the middle-aged man felt as if he had returned to his youth. This feeling was very good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 307. It was the middle of winter, and the cold wind was blowing in the vast Tianqi mountain. The temperature on the snow-capped peak was extremely low. Fortunately, the peak was too high and was not covered by the mist that permeated the valley between the foothills. The sun shone directly here. Although it did not bring much real warmth, it could bring some psychological comfort. Just as the middle-aged man by the Hulun Sea had guessed, there was indeed someone on the snow-capped peak that had not been seen for tens of thousands of years. It was a Taoist priest in a thin robe with an ebony fork in his hair bun. The Taoist priest looked calm and thin, carrying a wooden sword on his back. He quietly looked at the floating white clouds under the snow-capped peak, the barren wilderness under the white clouds, and the Hulun Sea that was like a white mirror. Yi Su, the world wayfarer from the Jishou Abbey, had made a bet with Tang, the world wayfarer from the Devil's Doctrine, on the two peaks outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. In the end, Ning Ke won, and Prince Long Qing was disabled. So, he lost. According to the bet that was not spoken but known to both of them, Yi Su could no longer participate in the fight for the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane. But this did not mean that he could not stand on the snow-capped peak and watch the show from afar. He saw the middle-aged man by the Hulun Sea, but in fact, he did not look at the middle-aged man. Because if he saw the middle-aged man could also see him. He came from the unworldly unknown place, but he knew very well that there were many real masters hidden in the world, such as the middle-aged man by the Hulun Sea. Even though he was powerful, he still had to be respectful and reserved to the masters at the peak of martial arts in the human world who were close to the divine transcendence. Of course, if he was still the proud lad with a wooden sword more than a decade ago, he would never care about these things. However, he was no longer the young him now. His understanding of the world and himself was already different. It was just that he would occasionally miss the compelling youth that had been far away for many years. One of the reasons why he was here was to see who would get the tomes of arcane. However, he had grown up in the Jisho Abbey and started reading the 6 volumes of tomes of arcane when he first learned to read. He did not have a sense of mystery and naturally did not have an inexplicable reverence for the tomes of arcane like the mortals or cultivators in the world. Therefore, this was not the real reason why he was here. At least, it was not as important as the real reason. He had come here to reminisce about the youth that had been lost for many years. Perhaps he had come to pay tribute to the youth that had been lost for many years, or perhaps he had come to find the youth that had been lost for many years. That youth was called Pride. Yi Su silently turned around and looked at a certain pool in the mountains. The pool was extremely small. Perhaps there was hot water gushing out from the bottom of the pool, so it had not been frozen for a few days. However, in the end, it could not withstand the biting cold wind, and a thin layer of ice had formed on the surface of the pool. Perhaps it was many days ago, or perhaps it was just a moment ago, but the thin ice on the surface of the small pond had a very small opening. Even he couldn't be sure when that piece of thin ice had been broken. But he could confirm that the shape of the opening on the surface of the pool was very special, like the trace left by a wooden dipper. 14 years ago, he had seen that wooden dipper, and then he could never forget it. 14 years ago, the most mysterious Tian hand scroll of the 7 volumes of tomes of arcane showed an extremely important sign. However, the Taoist in the abbey who was responsible for looking after the tomes of arcane remained absolutely silent about it. The great divine priest of revelation of the West Hill Divine Palace entered the abbey to read the tomes of arcane and did not say much. However, no one had expected that the great divine priest of light, Wei Guangming, would take half a step into the divine domain of Tianqi at this time. His deep and pure eyes saw the shadow of the night descending on the world. This generation of world wayfarers of Taoism, Buddhism, and Diabolism gathered in the wilderness. At that time, the 3 world wayfarers were still 3 teenagers. They gathered under a small tree and silently watched the ants for a long time. Then they looked at the black line for a long time and finally left separately. At that time, Yi Su, the successor of the Jisho Abbey, was very proud and very confident. He scolded Tang as an evil spirit and disdained Qi Nian as an outsider. He chopped the small tree into 53,333 pieces with one stroke of his sword, and then recited a Taoist hymn that he was most satisfied with so far. At that time, he did not know that when the night was coming, on the other side of the black line that they did not dare to cross, there was a scholar wearing straw shoes and a shabby coat sitting calmly beside a small pond. He held a scroll in his hand and read happily. There was a wooden dipper hanging on his waist. When he was hungry or thirsty, he would drink from the pond. After that, he traveled around the world and went to the South Sea. He excitedly reported to his master. The Taoist in indigo on the reef looked at him and smiled sympathetically. At that time, he knew that there was a person sitting on the other side of the black line that day. So he could no longer be as proud and confident as before. Many years later, after experiencing the prosperity of the secular world, he succeeded in seeing through many things. So confidence naturally returned to him. However, the youth and pride of that year were no longer there. He had always regretted that he did not have the opportunity to ask the person on the other side of the line. Until today, it seemed that he finally had the opportunity. So there was no one by the small pond. Standing on the top of the snow-capped peak, he looked seriously at the pond on the mountainside. Both the ebony fork in his Taoist bun and the thin light shirt on his body were motionless in the cold wind, just like his clear Taoist heart at that moment. There was someone by the Hulun Sea outside the snow mountain. The middle-aged man looked at the shore in front of him and suddenly stopped. Then he took off the hat that he had worn for many days and revealed his face. He looked at the vast mountains in the distance. His thick eyebrows, which were like silkworms, slightly frowned. His red lips, which were like thick blood, slightly curled up, revealing a complicated smile. In the biting cold wind, he walked again from the frozen lake to the solid ground. His strong body, which was as strong as steel, completely ignored the existence of the strong wind in the wilderness. He walked northward with a murderous intent. He did not walk fast, and even a little slowly. Every time his foot fell, he would sink into the frozen ground of the wilderness, leaving a deep footprint. He left the Hulun Sea and walked to the foothills of Tianqi Mountain in the north. As time passed, the murderous aura on the middle-aged man gradually disappeared. The footprints he left behind became shallower and shallower until there was no trace left. He was not like those grand cultivators in the world who knew the destiny of the world and integrated himself with the heaven and earth. This was because he had never practiced Taoism. He used his terrifying psyche power to completely isolate his body and consciousness from the heaven and earth. It was as if he had turned himself into a stone. If he closed his eyes, he would not be able to feel his existence. However, the small pond on the mountainside, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly moved. There was a very slight sound of splashing at the edge of the pond. The splashing sound was like the sound of a wooden dipper filling water, or the sound of the wind blowing leaves. It was also like the sound of a hand slowly closing the pages of a book. I heard that you were enlightened at the age of 13, no doubts at 30, see through in 3 months, and knowing destiny in 1 day. I heard that you climbed the mountain every day for 17 years without any hindrance. I heard that you saw 4 words outside the wooden door when you climbed the back of the mountain of the academy for the first time. The 4 words were, "The benevolent likes water." So you like to be close to clear streams and quiet ponds all your life. It seems that it is true today. Yi Su listened to the soft splashing sound coming from the small pond in the distant mountainside and thought about these words silently in his heart. Then, he let out an extremely lonely and satisfied sigh and took a step towards the edge of the snow-capped peak with a smile. As he took this step, the thin wooden sword behind him floated in the air and made a buzzing sound. The sun in the sky suddenly seemed to become a little brighter. Tens of thousands of beams of light shone on the wooden sword, making the thin sword body shine with golden light. An extremely pure sword style, like a condensed beam of light, came from the top of the snow-capped peak. It was calm and powerful, ignoring any space and distance, and instantly descended to the small pond thousands of feet away. Such a magical Taoism meant that he stood at the highest point in the world, at the top of the knowing destiny state. Although he had not broken the realm, he was only a step away from the Tianqi state. How many times in the world could one see such a powerful Taoism sword? When the pure sword style descended to the sky above the small pond on the mountainside, the thin ice on the surface of the water instantly became more solid. Even the tiny opening was frozen at a speed visible to the naked eye. The splashing sound had long disappeared. Somewhere on the bank of the pond, there was a slight sound of surprise. However, the reaction of the person who made the sound was a little slow. The speed at which he opened his mouth was very slow, so the sound seemed to be deliberately dragged out. It was long and distant, like the call of the protagonist of an opera when he appeared on stage. The middle-aged man at the foot of the mountain frowned slightly. Of course, he had sensed the sword intent. He did not know where the sword intent was heading, but he could vaguely guess who it was that was worthy of the man using his lifetime's cultivation to stab at. He had scattered countless spies in this wilderness and even mobilized the helpers in the military ministry. That person had appeared in the blue lake outside the city of Wei a few days ago. Why did he suddenly come here? But he did not hesitate. As a top powerhouse in the world, he could faintly feel his fate and knew that this was a great opportunity for him. Besides, he had his own pride, so he ignored the encounter on the snow-capped peak, which no one knew, but was destined to shock the world. He solemnly walked towards the exit of the valley. The valley was still filled with a thin mist, covering the smooth and steep stone walls as if they were cut by knives and axes. It also covered the sound of approaching footsteps, but it could not cover the figures of the young people inside forever. In the snow-capped peak, Yi Su, the successor of the Jishou Abbey, finally met the scholar on the other side of the line. At the foot of the snow-capped peak, the middle-aged man thought that he would soon meet the Tome of Arcane. Compared with this, it was worthwhile to wait for a long time. Whether it was 14 years or a lifetime. Double the last day. Please vote monthly. I will probably shout many times today. Sorry. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote monthly. Your support is my biggest motivation. Since he escaped from Chang'an City when he was a child, he had experienced many life and death situations. How could he be afraid of this kind of threat? He was not even afraid of death. However, he did have an innate fear of hunger because of his childhood experience. After a moment of silence, he once again found Tang Xiaotang, who was ashamed and speechless, because of this fear and the anger brought by this fear. He mocked, "Probably only people from your devil's doctrine would be stupid enough to split the mountain to make a path, thus turning the escape route of people into a dead end." Tang Xiaotang raised her head and looked at him with a solemn expression. She said solemnly, "Both the Holy Land and this passage represent the will of our Enlightenment doctrine to change the world. Please show some respect." Ning Ke did not want to respond to her, especially after he had heard too many stories from Master Lotus about changing the world and creating a new world. However, he could not fully understand the obsession of the devil's doctrine. Tang Xiaotang frowned and said, "Can you not be like this? If you think that our Enlightenment doctrine is useless and a bunch of stupid people, then why did you come to our holy land?" Ning Ke replied angrily, "If not for the appearance of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane, I would not have come even if the headmaster begged me." Tang Xiaotang's eyes lit up when she heard the words Ming hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane. She thought about how she and her brother had found nothing in the Holy Land. Her gaze naturally fell on the iron box tied with a cloth belt in front of Ning Quebec. She asked, "Have you found it?" Ning Ke said, "Don't look at me like that. The ashes of an old ghost are in this box. Speaking of which, why do I have to carry it with me? Shouldn't I just find a random place to throw it away?" It was strange that after walking through the passage for a few days, the four of them talked about their childhood, cultivation, and their favorite snacks. However, Ning Ke, Mo Shanshan, and Yi Hongyu did not mention to Tang Xiaotang about their encounter at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, nor did they mention the old monk named Lotus 32. This had nothing to do with Tang Xiaotang's identity as a member of the Devil's Doctrine. It had nothing to do with the conflict between the Orthodox and the Devil. It was not even because the experience was so painful and disgusting that the three of them did not want to recall it. On the contrary, it was because the three of them treated their encounter with Master Lotus as the most precious experience in their cultivation lives and were unwilling to share it with others. Ning Ke suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked at Tang Xiaotang. He asked, "You did not find the tomes of Arcane either? That is your territory. You should be familiar with the way back to your hometown. Did you not find anything?" Tang Xiaotang shook her head dejectedly and said, "There is nothing in the Holy Land." Ning Ke thought to himself that there was a pile of white bones and ghosts, and an old guy who was scarier than ghosts. All the major cultivation sects in the world had gathered in the wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace had put in a lot of effort to find the legendary Ming hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane when the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine opened. However, they had found nothing. The whereabouts of the legendary tomes of Arcane had naturally become the biggest mystery in everyone's hearts. Yi Hongyu said, "The great divine priest of revelation said that the Ming hand scroll would appear here, so it will definitely appear." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "It seems that the great divine priest of revelation was wrong." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said without hesitation, "How could the great divine priest of Divine Hall make a mistake?" Ning Ke looked at her and said mockingly, "If the divine priest of light did not make a mistake 1,000 years ago, how could the Devil's Doctrine appear in this world?" Or is it that the West Hill has always thought that the devil's doctrine is the right product? Yi Hongyu pursed her lips tightly and did not speak to him. Mo Shanshan sighed weakly and said with a smile, "Are you not going to argue with him anymore?" Yi Hongyu nodded and said, "I did make a mistake earlier." Ning Ke felt slightly proud and thought that no one in this world could beat him in verbal skills except Sang Sang. Yi Hongyu said immediately, "Since I said that I would kill him after we get out, why should I be angry with him?" Ning Ke said bitterly, "It was just a few jokes. Don't take it seriously." Tang Xiaotang, who was walking at the front, suddenly said in surprise, "It's true. It's true." Ning Ke was startled and asked, "What is true?" Tang Xiaotang turned around and pointed at the thin mist in front of the passage. Her clear eyes were full of joy and she said, "That is really the exit." "We are out." Looking at the faint light in the mist at the end of the passage, they vaguely guessed that it was the exit. After going through so many hardships and running out of food, they should be jumping for joy. They should even be holding hands, shoulder to shoulder, wearing ribbons and youthful smiles on their faces. However, they stopped and fell into silence. Even Tang Xiaotang was no exception. In the long passage, they were isolated from the rest of the world. That was why they could forget about each other's sect background and temporarily forget about the so-called good and evil, as well as the complicated hatred that could not be washed away by blood. However, once they walked out of this mountain abandoned by Haotian and returned to the real world, all these factors would return. The four of them looked at each other and remained silent for a long time. Yi Hongyu suddenly said indifferently, "I am not used to pretending to be sad. After we get out, I will need to recuperate for a period of time. So it should be a long time before I kill you and the siren from the devil's doctrine." Tang Xiaotang looked at her proudly and said, "You are still injured now. I will hit you when you recover." Mo Shanshan gently tidied her cotton dress and said with a smile, "Anyway, it has nothing to do with me." Yi Hongyu sneered and said, "If I want to kill Ning Ke, will it really have nothing to do with you?" Ning Ke waved his hand to stop the meaningless conversation and said, "Let's talk outside. Xiaotang, you go first." Tang Xiaotang looked into his eyes and said seriously, "I know what you mean. You are worried that there is something strange outside the fog, so you let me go first. I am a disciple of the Enlightenment doctrine. How can I escape if the people outside are all from the Central Plains? Besides, you are a man. Just like what she said, you are a disgrace to the academy." Ning Ke's expression did not change. He said seriously, "Why did you suddenly become so smart?" Tang Xiaotang said, "I am just kind-hearted. I am not really stupid." Hearing this, Ning Ke naturally thought of Sang Sang. Sang Sang was just a little stupid, but not really stupid. He suddenly had a strong desire to return to Chang'an. He looked at the exit in the fog and said, "I will go first. The most powerful young disciples of Taoism, Devil and Talisman are all here. Together with me, the world wayfarer of the academy, I don't believe that anyone would not kneel down and kowtow when they see our super combination, let alone ambush us." These words were obviously used to boost his courage, just like how he had been bickering and joking with the Tao addict and the girls from the devil's doctrine these days. The reason why he did this was to ease the heavy feeling in his chest. No one knew that he, the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, had joined the devil. Even Yi Hongyu only vaguely guessed that he had inherited the mantle of youngest uncle and was about to return to the human world. He did not know what the cold and real world outside the valley would do to welcome him if the truth of his joining the devil was discovered. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke walked into the fog. He reached his right hand behind him and slowly held the handle of the big black umbrella. The big black umbrella was his biggest support in this world. It was the warmest and quietest existence in the world, like a wild cat's dark house. When he faced Lotus at the front gate of the devil's doctrine, he did not have time to take it out and almost died. At this time, he was about to return to the human world from the isolated mountain. The strange feeling and vigilance made him ready to take out the big black umbrella at any time. The world outside the fog was not under the attack of thousands of people. There was no sneak attack. Ning Kai was greeted with a fist. A fist bigger than the cheap Tuhai bowl that Sang Sang bought. The fist was open and aboveboard, full of the aura of gold and stone. It broke the wind and arrived without any sense of evil. It was not a sneak attack. It was a kill. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 309. It was indeed not a sneak attack. Even Ning Kai had to admit that it was not a sneak attack after analyzing it. Because the fist appeared very openly, and it was at least 100 feet away from his face. No one could sneak attack from a distance of more than 100 feet. Arrows could, but not fists. The reason why the fist could be seen was that the moment it appeared, all the fog in the mountain path was forcibly dispersed by the fist wind into smaller particles, and could no longer obstruct vision. The smooth and steep stone wall was clear. The mountain path was clear. That was why Ning Kai could see the fist. And the middle-aged man who was as strong as a mountain. He had no time to think, let alone see the appearance of the middle-aged man clearly, because the fist bigger than a bowl, after shattering the fog in the passage, almost came to him without a pause. In his sight, the fist instantly became countless times bigger. Because the fist was so fast, the wind in the narrow passage did not have time to swell, but was compressed and stuck to the smooth stone wall. Then all the sound disappeared, and there was a deathly silence. It was not a sneak attack, but it was more terrible than a sneak attack, because it was an absolute kill relying on super strength. In the face of such a fist that could expel the air and seem to move faster than sound, Ning Kai only had time to make one move. It was a move that he had done countless times before his death since he was a child. He was extremely familiar with it. The strange cry caused by the strong threat of death was still brewing in his chest and abdomen, and the skin that was stimulated by the shadow of death did not have time to stand up. The big black umbrella had already opened, like a piece of the night sky, blocking in front of him. The fist fell on the surface of the big black umbrella. The big black umbrella did not break, and there was nothing in the world that could break it for the time being. But the thick and greasy surface of the umbrella sank deeply at that moment, and there was a very exaggerated deformation. This was the most serious deformation of the big black umbrella since it appeared in the world, so it could be imagined what kind of power the fist carried. In the second moment that could not be seen by the naked eye, and even time lost its effect, the thick surface of the big black umbrella began to recover, and with the recovery, the incredible and terrible power passed to the umbrella. The umbrella handle left Ning Kai's perlicue, leaving several deep white lacerations. The blood was still in the lacerations and had no time to ooze out, because the third instant was also the instant that transcended time. Ning Kai's eyes reflected the color of the big black umbrella, and then suddenly brightened for a moment. He began to suck in his abdomen, exhale, and flatten his chest. His feet began to stand on tiptoe, ready to leave the ground. Before these subtle movements could be completed, the handle of the big black umbrella had already stabbed into his chest. Fortunately, he had already made these preparations in such a short period of time, so he did not die. The handle of the big black umbrella fell like a mountain, directly hitting his chest. Ning Kai's feet left the ground, his chest and abdomen sunk, and then he flew up. That terrifying mountain-like strength gradually diminished during the long journey. For this, he paid a very heavy price, and blood spurted out like a waterfall. Although the pain in his chest kept tearing his body like a devil, and the fear of death kept stabbing his mind, his eyes were still calm and focused. He kept trying to adjust his posture while flying backward, and at the same time, the primordial chi deep in his lower abdomen quickly spread to his limbs, trying to use the remains left by youngest uncle to repair his injuries. But the fist would not give him time. In fact, the fist did not stop at all. Even the big black umbrella could not block the fist, even for a short moment. Ning Ke was hit and flew. The fist also flew up. It followed him coldly and powerfully like Yama. The passage leading from the Devil's Doctrine to the outside of the Tianqi Mountains was very secretive. In order to ensure that no one could see it from the outside or on the mountain, it was very narrow. Therefore, when the fist broke through the fog and hit Ning Ke, it had to pass by the three girls who had just reacted. Of course, the first one to attack was Mo Shanshan. How could she watch Ning Ke be beaten to death? She felt the horrible power in the fist, and the aura of the middle-aged man was as sharp as metal and stone, and even faintly stronger than that of her master. Under the pressure of many factors, the most excellent female talisman master in the world finally stimulated an unprecedented ability, and drew the most powerful half-divine talisman in the blink of an eye. The distant talisman intent condensed in the passage, and a strong airflow steamed here. However, the fist did not hesitate and directly blasted over. The airflow was completely broken, and the talisman intent was completely destroyed. The second one to attack was the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu. In fact, she did not want to attack, because she was the first one to recognize the identity of the middle-aged man. She knew that he was a visiting professor of the Divine Hall, and she knew how powerful he was. Moreover, she did not like Ning Ke at all. If that shameless guy was directly smashed into meat paste by this fist, she would not shed a tear. However, she had to attack, because she found that the fist was so perfect. Only an emotionless person could deliver such a perfect punch, and only an irreversible punch could be unstoppable. In an instant, she understood that even if the other party recognized her, there was no way he would allow such a perfect punch to be flawed in the slightest. This punch had been infused with the most absolute determination, and this was the attitude that the person who delivered the punch had towards the world. She stood on the path that the fist had to pass, so she could only display the most powerful invisible Taoist sword and cut it down. She did not have any hope for this sword, because she knew that even if she was still in the knowing destiny state, she was far from being a match for the middle-aged man. She even thought that even the great divine priest of judgment was not as powerful as the opponent. Sure enough, the most powerful invisible Taoist sword of the Tao addict was like a wooden sword of a child in front of this fist. It suddenly collapsed and shattered, and instantly became invisible, leaving no trace in the passage. The last one to attack was Tang Xiaotang. Because she thought that as a disciple of the Enlightenment doctrine, the exit might be full of the so-called righteous cultivators of the Central Plains, so she insisted on standing at the back. She did not know who the middle-aged man was, but she guessed who he was. So there was no fear in her clear eyes, but a trace of excitement. The excitement was not because she believed that she could defeat the opponent. In fact, she knew that it was impossible for her to defeat the opponent. So she did not fight head-on like she did with the snowfield dire wolves, nor did she slash Prince Long Qing with the blood-red giant knife. Instead, she crossed her arms in front of her body, making the strongest defense she could make. Unsurprisingly, the cross-shaped arms hit back on her delicate chest heavily, and instantly dispersed. The fist style of this fist was always focused on Ning Quebec. It only occasionally passed by the three girls, and did not release its real power. However, this kind of passing by was like a flood passing by a small mountain village, destroying everything. Ning Ke closed the big black umbrella with a swoosh, letting it help him regain his balance like a black tail. Looking at the fist that was getting closer and closer, his eyes were calm and focused, and his left hand had already grasped the hilt of the knife behind him. The shadow of death was right in front of him, because the fist was right in front of him. He was very afraid. The experience of struggling for survival in the past years told him that the more dangerous the situation was, the more calm he had to be. Many times, it was this calmness that had successfully kept him away from death. He hoped that it could be the same today. It was as if Haotian or Yama had heard his prayer, moved by his calmness in the face of death. The fragments of information that Master Lotus had imprinted in his spiritual world suddenly came to life. Ning Ke could not understand those things, but he understood the fist. He even thought of many ways to deal with it without reason. Those ways were so wonderful and unimaginable, but those ways required a state that he could not reach now. Was this the absolute difference in the power of the state? Ning Ke looked at the fist, and there was finally a trace of despair in his eyes. From the moment he broke through the fog to the moment he arrived in front of Ning Ke, the middle-aged man who was as burly as a mountain had only punched once. After pondering for many days by the Hulun Sea, he threw away all the shackles of the world and decided to make a complete break with the past. This was a punch that gathered all the spirit of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts in the world. Just one of these punches was enough to beat the four young experts like dogs. Such a punch could not be stopped at all. There were not many people in the world who were worthy of his punch twice. And no one could make this punch stop. The Tang Emperor could not, and neither could the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch. However, when the fist was about to touch Ning Ke, it stopped. Such a decisive and perfect punch, which Yi Hongyu thought was a one-way trip, stopped in front of Ning Ke just like that. This change between extreme movement and extreme stillness showed the middle-aged man's incredible state of martial arts. Yes, no one in the world could make this punch stop, except for the middle-aged man himself. However, this punch came from Tuyang City thousands of miles away, across the plains and the lake, with endless determination, and even with the determination to be the enemy of the world. Why did it stop at this moment? A scholar had appeared beside Ning Ke out of nowhere. This scholar had straight eyebrows and wide eyes, and looked amiable. He wore an old robe and a pair of broken straw shoes. A wooden dipper was tied to his waist, and an old book was stuck in it. He was covered with dust, but he looked extremely clean. It was hard to tell how old the scholar was, and he did not reveal any powerful aura. He just stood quietly beside Ning Ke, and even seemed a little honest and dull. However, as long as he stood there, no matter how strong the punch was, no matter how decisive it was, the punch that could not be stopped had to stop, and did not dare to move forward at all. Because he was the eldest brother of the academy. Yes, dear, there is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 310. Although the back of the mountain of the Academy was the only unknown place that was connected to the secular world, it had the reputation of being an unknown place after all. Naturally, it was a bit mysterious to outsiders. Especially after Yuan Shihao, the disciples of the back of the mountain of the Academy rarely appeared in the world. Therefore, not many people really knew about that place and who lived there. Not to mention the secular empires, the West Hill Divine Palace, even the Jishou Abbey, the Xiankong Temple, and the Devil's Doctrine only knew the general situation of the back of the mountain of the Academy. They only knew that there were 13 core disciples of the headmaster of the Academy behind the clouds and mist. They cultivated their day and night, and their strength was unfathomable. Among all the core disciples of the headmaster of the Academy, the most famous ones were second brother Jun Mo and Chen Pipi. The so-called fame here was, of course, in the top circle of the cultivation world. Second brother was famous for his pride and confidence, while Chen Pipi was famous because he was recognized by Haotian Taoism as a real cultivation genius not long after he was born and was recognized by the Jishou Abbey. The only thing the cultivation world knew about the eldest brother of the Academy was that he was a scholar. He often held a scroll in his hand and tied a water ladle around his waist. He traveled with the headmaster of the Academy all year round. Few people could see him with their own eyes, and no one had ever really fought with him. However, no one dared to look down on the eldest brother of the Academy. Because the eldest brother of the Academy was the only one who was qualified to travel around the world with the headmaster of the Academy. Jun Mo, who was perversely proud, would sigh every time he mentioned his senior brother, and then express his supreme respect with the most unquestionable expression. There were many strong, proud and confident people in this world, such as the middle-aged man. However, none of them dared to say that they were stronger, prouder, and more confident than the monster Junimo. Therefore, as long as they were not really crazy, they would not try to challenge the eldest brother of the academy. Therefore, when the ordinary scholar appeared beside Ning Ke, the fist with decades of fierce and chilling aura, which could not be stopped even by 100,000 mountains, had to stop. The middle-aged man had never seen him before, but he saw the water ladle and the scroll at the waist of the scholar. Therefore, he knew that he was the eldest brother of the academy without any reason. Because the eldest brother of the academy was the eldest brother of the academy. Whether he was holding a scroll, walking in the ruts of the wilderness, or half-squatting by the stream to fetch water with a ladle, as long as you saw him, you would know that he was the legendary eldest brother of the academy. Because there was only one academy in the world, and the academy only had one eldest brother. He was different from the middle-aged man who had been struggling in the mortal world for many years. Even though he had meditated for many days by the Hulun Sea and tried to cut off the past from the past, he was still distracted by too many worldly thoughts and stopped his fist. He was different from the middle-aged man who had struggled in the mortal world for many years. Standing on the top of the snow-capped peak, Yi Su had always wanted to challenge the eldest brother of the academy. He was the successor of the Jishou Abbey and the most powerful world wayfarer in Haotian Taoism. 14 years ago, he had been arrogant and conceited since he was a teenager. He could understand the arrogance of Mr. Ke and the second brother of the academy, Junimo. Therefore, he respected the scholar whom he had never met because of Junmo's attitude. But he would never miss the opportunity to challenge the scholar. Because his arrogance and confidence in his youth had gradually disappeared and turned into silence and loneliness because of the scholar's calmness and joy on the other side of the black line. He knew very well that he, who walked the world in silence and loneliness with a wooden sword on his back, was far stronger than the arrogant and conceited him. However, he always wanted to find what he had lost, so he had to meet the person on the other side of the black line. This idea could even be called an emotion of desire. In these years, as his cultivation state became more and more profound, and as his understanding of the world became clearer, the desire became stronger and stronger in his heart. It was even stronger than the sunlight above the snow-capped peak. After 14 years, he finally met the scholar and had a chance to challenge him. For the tomes of the arcane, the middle-aged man walked on the lake ice and tried to kill him. If the scholar did not want to see the guy named Ning Ke die like this, then he had to fight. Yi Su was not sure whether he could force the scholar to fight if the scholar did not move. But since the scholar showed his trace and was ready to fight, then he was confident that he could make this encounter a reality. Because he could make the first move. The thin wooden sword floated in the air above the snow-capped peak. The sun was so bright. The wooden sword had turned into a golden sword. The strong and pure aura of the Taoist sword had completely suppressed the small pool on the mountainside. The snow on the top of the snow-capped peak was all crushed by the sword aura into ice that was harder than iron. The ice reflected the sunlight into colorful colors, as if it had become a floor of agate jewelry. This was the most powerful Taoist sword that Yi Su had ever displayed in his life. It contained the supreme attainments of Haotian Taoism. He had cultivated hard in the Jishou Abbey for more than 10 years and traveled around the world for more than 10 years. He had realized the ultimate life-death sword style before he entered the Hermetic training. When the sword of Tao disregarded the vast distance and descended to the side of the pool, Yi Su sighed in the depths of his heart. Even he himself was moved by this strike. He felt that it was perfect and pure to the extreme, without a speck of dust on it. At that time, the scholar by the pool raised his head and looked at the top of the snow-capped peak in surprise. His shabby cotton-padded jacket was covered with dust, leaving traces of thousands of miles of travel. But it gave people the feeling that it was extremely clean. No one knew how long had passed. Maybe it was a long time, or maybe it was just a blink of the scholar's eyes. The ice on the top of the snow-capped peak gradually melted and converged into a very thin stream. Yi Su, who was standing by the snow cliff, slowly lowered his head to look at the water beside his feet. No one could tell what expression he had on his face. The pure and powerful life-death sword style, condensed with thousands of beams of sunlight, instantly crushed the snow into ice. But the ice melted at this time, which could only mean that the sword style that should have been condensed like a beam of light was actually slowly leaking. Unbeknownst to him, the thin wooden sword had returned to his hands. The scholar by the pool on the mountainside had disappeared without a trace. Yi Su showed a very sarcastic smile on his face, and a very dim blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. The sarcastic smile was naturally to mock himself. He had known the other party for many years and had silently longed to meet him for many years. However, when they really met, the most powerful Taoist sword that he could display could not suppress the other party at all. It could not even make the other party stay for a longer time. The extremely powerful successor of the Jishou Abbey, who had seen through the hermetic training, could not make the scholar stay. The scholar appeared in the valley beside Ning Ke and calmly asked the powerhouse at the peak of martial arts to stop punching. There was an academy in the south of Chang'an, and there was an eldest brother in the back of the mountain of the academy. In the words of the proud and conceited second brother, the reason why the eldest brother was naturally because he ranked first in the academy. Whether it was the state of cultivation, playing chess, playing the zither, painting, embroidery, or cooking, he ranked first. Today's update ends. Please vote for me. I will also rank first like the eldest brother. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 311. It was not until the fist stopped that the wind in the tunnel suddenly roared. The natural energy was in a mess, and all the fog was blown away. The smooth and steep stone wall began to peel like a pastry that had been kept for a long time. The stone wall that had become brittle rustled and fell like a rain of paper-thin stone chips. The fist was extremely stable and did not tremble in the slightest. The hard knuckles were pale white, looking like a strong bamboo in the wind, or like the round handle of a steel knife. To be able to suddenly stop when the indomitable momentum had reached its peak, and to be able to be so stable, it proved that the middle-aged man who punched this fist was very powerful. But the more powerful the middle-aged man and his fist were, the more powerful the eldest brother of the academy was. The eldest brother looked at the fist calmly and did not say a word. The middle-aged man slowly bent his elbow and retracted his fist. The eldest brother's gentle eyes fell on the middle-aged man's face. The middle-aged man slightly lowered his head and silently took a step back. The eldest brother's eyes fell on the stone chips under the middle-aged man's feet. The middle-aged man slightly frowned and silently took another step back. The eldest brother calmly looked at his shoulder. The middle-aged man retreated again. The eldest brother continued to look at him. The middle-aged man retreated again and again until he was about to exit the passageway. At this moment, he suddenly stopped and slightly raised his thick silkworm-like eyebrows. He calmly looked back at the eldest brother's gentle eyes and opened his blood-red lips slightly. He said in a voice that was like metal and stone, "I'm sorry." As the two words burst out from his lips, the half-stretched fist in front of him slowly loosened. The 5 fingers slowly released like old bamboo blooming, and then suddenly shrank. An extremely powerful and overbearing aura was released from the middle-aged man, making his clothes flutter in the wind. An invisible force was released between the 5 fingers that were spread out and then closed again, aiming at Ning Ke's chest and abdomen through the air. After all, he was a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts. Although he was afraid of the eldest brother of the academy, it did not mean that he would become a coward in front of him and would not dare to attack at all. When the eldest brother appeared, he had been showing weakness and retreated again and again. But when he was about to exit the passageway and saw that he could not threaten Ning Ke at all, when everyone had begun to relax, he made his move. With a tearing sound, the cloth in front of Ning Ke's chest broke. The iron box tied to the cloth belt suddenly flew out and landed in the hands of the middle-aged man. By transforming the killing intent of his fist into the intent of binding his fingers, he displayed the deepest understanding of martial arts. His grasp of timing and his strong decisiveness allowed him to apply the art of war to the confrontation of force. He could be said to be like a god in the art of war. There were very few people in the world who could cultivate martial arts and the art of war to the pinnacle. Even in the great Tang Empire, only the 4 great generals could do it. With the iron box in hand, the middle-aged man had nothing else to ask for. He looked at eldest brother silently and continued to slowly retreat out of the valley. His speed did not seem to increase, but he had retreated more than 10 feet in an instant. Looking at the figure of the middle-aged man retreating out of the valley, eldest brother was slightly taken aback. He was indeed surprised that the middle-aged man had clearly intended to retreat, but in the end, he still forced himself to attack. He sighed and said, "Why bother?" Eldest brother did not speak too slowly, but his tone was a little light. It seemed that there was a very strange pause before every word, so it seemed that he had said the word, "Why bother," for a long time. Even he did not expect the middle-aged man's action, so he did not have time to respond. Of course, Ning Ke did not have any reaction. He did not come to his senses until the middle-aged man retreated far away with the iron box. Moreover, he had suffered too much shock at this time and had no spare time to think about other problems. According to the description of appearance that he had memorized for so many years, that powerful middle-aged man with eyebrows like black silkworms and lips like thick blood should be Xia Ho. The Xia Ho who killed the whole family of the general's mansion and turned his happy life into cultivation in the underworld. The Xia Ho who massacred several villages at the border and killed Darky's whole family. And who was this scholar who wore a tattered coat and straw sandals beside him? Ning Ke had seen him on the first day he entered the academy. He clearly remembered this clean, amiable and trustworthy scholar who made him fearful. He remembered that the scholar wanted to exchange the water ladle at his waist for his big black umbrella. At this time, he had already guessed that this scholar was probably his eldest brother. After eldest brother sighed, he looked at Ning Ke and asked, "Is the box important? Do you want to snatch it back?" Ning Ke did not understand why the middle-aged man, who might be Xia Ho, wanted to snatch the iron box. He also did not understand why the scholar, who might be his eldest brother, could still ask such a slow question at this time. The box contained the ashes of Master Lotus, which was not worth a single cent. Of course, there was no need to take the risk to snatch it back. However, the other party had already snatched it for such a long time. Wasn't it a little too slow to ask him now? Suddenly, he remembered that Chen Pipi had once told him that eldest brother was very serious when he did things. That was why he moved very slowly, very slowly. Today, he had seen that eldest brother was indeed a very slow person. Ning Ke bowed respectfully and said with his head lowered, "The box is not important. There is no need to snatch it." Then, he raised his head and looked at it seriously. It was a scholar who wore a cotton-padded coat and tattered shoes. An old book was stuck at his waist and a water ladle was tied to it. He did not give off any strong aura, nor was he tall or mighty. However, standing beside this scholar, Ning Ke felt inexplicably safe. He felt calm and happy, as if he had returned home and knew that no one would dare to bully him. It was like standing under a lush green tree, unafraid of the outside world's wind and rain. This absolute and unquestionable sense of security even moved him to silence. Eldest brother could roughly understand his feelings at this time and smiled warmly. When he began to seriously think about how he should start a conversation with his youngest brother, he suddenly felt something and looked up at the sky in surprise. The fog in the mountain road had long been shattered by the fist, and the fog was still lingering in the air. Looking up at the sky, he could not see the snow-capped peak at all. He could only see that the fog had been torn open, and there was a figure in front of the crack. The figure should have jumped down from the snow-capped peak, or more like it had jumped down from the sky. It continuously broke through the air and fog, making a heart-palpitating low vibrating sound. It could be imagined how fast it had reached. The thin fog on the mountain road dispersed with a bang, and a circular hole appeared. The figure fell from it, wrapped in a semicircle of water mist, and the bloody flame on its legs was burning vigorously. A strong and overbearing aura shrouded the ground from the figure, locking the area of dozens of feet. The pair of old boots, which had walked all the way from the cold region of the far north, was getting closer and closer to the ground, and was about to step on the middle-aged man's head. When the middle-aged man came, he was like fire, and when he retreated, he was also extremely fast. However, the person who jumped down from the sky had obviously been lying in wait for a long time. He had actually locked the ground of dozens of feet in a domineering manner, knowing that no matter where the middle-aged man retreated, he would not be able to completely avoid it. More importantly, he hoped that the middle-aged man would avoid it. Under such circumstances, as long as the middle-aged man avoided it again today, the breath that the other party relied on to survive in this world would be exhausted, and the result would be death. However, what could he do if he did not avoid it? The last time the man jumped down from the sky, it was the first time his old boots had stepped on the wilderness. With one step, he had crushed the shield of the strongest warrior of the royal court tribe, and trampled the sorcerer into a puddle of blood. The middle-aged man did not avoid it, because he knew he could not avoid it, because he could clearly feel the murderous intent of the foot above his head, and the familiar and even somewhat intimate sense of ruthlessness. Although he had not smelled it for many years, no matter how long it had been, as long as he smelled it, he would be vigilant and silent. Because it was also his smell, the smell that belonged to the Enlightenment sect. The middle-aged man's eyebrows that were dense like black silkworms suddenly rose up, and a trace of ruthlessness appeared on his handsome face. His feet sank into the hard stone ground with a bang, and he bent his knees and transferred all the cultivation in his body into his right fist. He smashed his fist towards the sky. The old boots with blood-red flames, and the fist with a metallic luster, met in the valley. The powerful and domineering aura directly tore the primordial chi of the universe in the valley into countless tiny turbulence. The turbulence could not escape in all directions, but was pitifully wrapped in by these two completely opposite and even conflicting yet equally domineering and powerful auras, forming two semicircular air shields. The semicircular air shield around the old boots flashed with a blood-red light, and spat towards the sky with a hissing sound. The semicircular air shield around the fist flashed with a golden luster, and spat towards the ground with a hissing sound. Except for the hissing sound of the air splashing, the valley was dead silent. The Hullen Sea in the distance outside the valley suddenly trembled. Dozens of tiny cracks appeared on the increasingly solid ice surface, which was blown by the cold wind. At the intersection of the cracks, ice avalanches and water appeared. A few fish that were not so fat jumped out of the ice holes, and were frozen after struggling for a while on the ice. Then, a sound came from the valley. The sound was extremely loud, and contained pure power, like a clap of thunder. A big pit half the depth of a person appeared on the ground. After the clap of thunder came a distant echo, like the sound of a bell. The stone chips that had just been shattered by the two auras no longer flew in the air, but calmly fell down. Mo Shanshan and the others, who were shocked by the two auras again, found that they were not seriously injured. The two most domineering auras in the world collided, but there was almost no leakage of power. Instead, they accurately locked each other, and then the distant heaven and earth gave enough response. When the two domineering auras collided, they actually evolved into a grand feeling. What state had the two people who were fighting reached? Eldest brother looked at the collision of the two absolute powers in front of him, and even he was full of praise. He said seriously to Ning Ke, who was standing behind him, the previous masters of the devil's doctrine were basically all killed by youngest uncle. Now it is very difficult to see two great masters of the devil's doctrine face to face. Youngest brother, you have to carefully observe and learn. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. He hit Xiaoho's body heavily, bursting out a mark about 2 fingers deep. There was a hint of fire flowing in the mark, and there was a burning smell. In comparison, Xiaoho's fists were more silent and solid. His tough knuckles glowed with a very faint metallic luster. Every punch was like a blunt broadsword slashing forward, hitting Dun's body as if he was forging iron. Every punch hit Xiaoho's body, and the sound of thunder was continuous. Dozens of dense deep pits appeared on the stone walls of the mountain. The smoke and dust gradually disappeared, and the smooth inner walls of the deep pits were revealed, which looked extremely terrifying. As expected of people with the strongest physical strength in the world. These two men's fists did not actually touch the stone wall. Just the killing intent that leaked out was enough to pierce through the hard stone wall like it was dough. However, when such powerful fists truly smashed into each other's bodies, they did not seem to feel anything at all. What kind of fists were these? What kind of physical bodies? Every punch that fell on their bodies was like a heavy hammer falling on an ancient bell. The sound became more and more intense and shrill, and the situation became more and more dangerous. There was a strong wind at the side of the valley, and the gravel danced wildly. Ning Ke and the other 3 stood behind eldest brother and did not rush directly. However, they could feel the terrifying power coming from there, and their faces could not help but become a little pale. This was because their eardrums were oppressed by the wind and sound of the fists, and more so because their minds were suppressed by the power of the 2 men. Yi Hongyu stared at the man who fell from the sky, and her pale cheeks revealed her true feelings. She gradually admitted that this unusually ordinary man in a leather coat was indeed qualified to be on the same level as her brother. Tang Xiaotang and her eyes fell on the same place, looking at her brother. Her pale cheeks were full of worry, and her clear and bright eyes constantly showed an expression of cheering for him. Mo Shanshan stood beside Ning Quebec. Her small round face was slightly pale, and her eyes seemed a little dim. She was originally a calligraphy addict who was respected and even feared by her fellow cultivators. However, this time she came to the wilderness and met so many grand cultivators. Only then did she know that the real powerful figures were hiding behind the world. She was deeply shocked, especially when she found out that the 2 men who were fighting at this time were so powerful that even her master, the master of calligrapher, would not be able to take advantage of them. Thinking of this, she could not help but feel a little sad. Ning Ke was not as complicated as the 3 girls thought. He was just following eldest brother's request and watching this rare battle of the physical peak seriously. He did not forget to use his superhuman perception to feel the disturbance of the chi of heaven and earth caused by the 2 figures. However, as soon as he used his psyche power to feel the surrounding chi of heaven and earth, he knew that he had made a big mistake. At this time, the chi of heaven and earth inside and outside the valley had been torn into countless pieces by the wind of the 2 men's fists. The turbulence formed by those pieces flowed irregularly and was extremely complicated. With his current state, it was pure wishful thinking for him to feel the changes in it. His sense of perception was instantly violently shaken, and his face turned pale. He should have been injured. The 2 men were too powerful. According to the probability or the general law given by Haotian, figures with such powerful physical bodies should be unparalleled in the world. However, today there were 2 of them at the same time. Looking at the sky full of gravel, looking at the more and more invisible stone pits that appeared like a miracle, and looking at the 2 godlike murderous figures, Ning Ke was stunned. After a while, he came to his senses and asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "Are we just going to watch them fight like this? Or should we leave first?" I always feel that it is very dangerous to stay with these monsters. Even a stone that they unconsciously kick away is more terrible than a crossbow arrow. Eldest brother looked at him and said confusedly, "Then what should we do?" Ning Ke looked at the scene and said with a smile, "Or you can poke them to death with one finger." "How can it be possible with one finger? I'm not a monster like them. I'm very happy that they didn't attack me for the headmaster and the academy's sake. But I can't do anything if they want to fight among themselves. I can't always stop them. As for taking the initiative to attack them, I feel that it is somewhat inconvenient and unkind." Eldest brother was a very kind person, so he would not attack at this time. He explained patiently, slowly, and gently, "And I'm really not good at fighting." As a member of the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Ke certainly knew that the senior brothers and sisters living in the mountain were all strange guys. Only he was slightly normal. However, he still did not expect that eldest brother would give such an answer. "No one would dare to attack you if you just stood here, but you still said that the other party was a monster and you were not a monster. If you said that you were not good at fighting, then who in this world dared to say that they were good at fighting?" Finding that eldest brother was also a little unreliable, Ning Ke still felt the stable, warm, and intimate feeling in his heart, but the respect in his heart instantly fell to the ground. He ignored eldest brother and quietly moved to Tang Xiaotang's side, asking, "Your brother?" Tang Xiaotang nodded. Ning Ke thought that it was true. The only person who could fight with Xia Ho, a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, was the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. He then asked, "Why do people in your family like to jump down from the sky?" Tang Xiaotang nervously watched the fight and casually answered, "It's hard to fall down, so I'm too lazy to walk." Ning Ke's body slightly stiffened, thinking that this pair of brother and sister from the Devil's Doctrine were really a pair of wonderful people who were extremely lazy. At this moment, the two roaring figures in the field finally stopped. In the battle, Tang's leather coat had already been fluttered like butterflies under Xia Ho's iron fists, and then fell to the ground like lead weights. His upper body was naked, and his muscles were as hard as rocks. The skin surface of his face and body was condensed with a very thin layer of iron, especially in his eyes, which faintly revealed an ominous feeling of rust. Xiao's silkworm-like eyebrows were completely burnt and had lost all vitality. He looked like a lifeless black insect. His eyes were filled with a strong sense of dryness, as if there was an autumn hidden in them. Tang looked at him indifferently and said, "You want to take the tomes of arcane, so I will take your life." Xia Ho slowly tore off the tattered clothes on his body, revealing the armor underneath. He looked at Tang indifferently and said, "There are many people in this world who want to kill me, but at least no one has succeeded so far." Today, the battle between the two generations of powerhouses in the Devil's Doctrine began with Tang's supreme killing intent. He silently followed behind Ning Ke and the others, waiting for Xia Ho to appear and snatch the tomes of arcane. He had been silently waiting for this sneak attack, or rather, to kill, for this opportunity for many years. He had the advantage of time, place, and people, so Xia Ho's injuries were obviously more serious than his. However, Xia Ho did not die after all. Even though Xia Ho's chest and abdomen had suffered numerous heavy punches, and the cotton coat on his body was full of holes like the mold of the Academy's plum cake, and his aura was extremely dry and gloomy, he still stood there like an unshakable mountain. Years ago, the traitor of the Devil's Doctrine had personally cooked and killed the Saintess, surrendered to the West Hill Divine Palace, and became a visiting professor. He had led the army in the Tang Empire for many years, and such a powerful person would not die so easily. After a moment of silence, Tang said, "Your injuries are much more serious than mine. I still have a chance." Xia Ho shook his head and said, "After all, you are not your teacher. So no matter how serious my injuries are, you can't kill me on the spot. You are the evildoer of the Devil's Doctrine, and I am a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism, an imperial general. In this bright world, under the brilliant Haotian, how can you have a chance to kill me?" Tang turned to look at the scholar among the crowd and asked seriously, Mr. First, what do you want to say? Eldest brother shook his head and said honestly, your affairs have nothing to do with the academy. I was just ordered by my teacher to come to the wilderness to take youngest brother back to Chang'an. Honest people did not always speak the truth. Coming to the wilderness to pick up Ning Ke was not on the way. Tang nodded in acknowledgement. Eldest brother suddenly pointed to the snow-capped peak and said, I was just passing by, but I don't know what that person would think. A sword-style attacked from the snow-capped peak, instantly crossing the ice and crushing the snow. After a moment, the lonely and no longer proud man with a wooden sword appeared on the snow cliff in the distance. It's really hard to write in the hotel. Tomorrow's chapter may be a little late. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 313. At the foot of Tianqi Mountain, two generations of powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine confronted each other. On the distant snow cliff, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism was gliding over with a sword on his back. Compared to these truly great figures, Ning Ke was naturally an insignificant character. Although he was now a world wayfarer of the academy, the only one who was qualified to speak on behalf of the academy was the eldest brother, who was standing quietly in the field. Therefore, no one paid attention to him and treated him as a passerby. Ning Ke did not feel sad about being ignored. On the contrary, he was happy that he had been forgotten by the crowd. Only in this way could he focus on the middle-aged man and not worry about being discovered by the crowd. Looking at the middle-aged man's thick brows and the killing intent in his eyes, his expression did not change, but his hands behind his back gradually tightened. He felt that his throat was a little dry and wanted to drink some blood to moisten it. His life was directly changed by this middle-aged man called Xia Ho. His happy family became a pool of blood because of this man. Because of this man, he lived in a dark hell on earth for many years. Revenge was the most primitive and instinctive emotion of human beings, and Ning Ke was no exception. Ever since he knew the name and identity of this man, he had secretly investigated and watched this man for many years. He was very familiar with everything about this man, including his most inconspicuous features and habits. But today was the first time he saw him with his own eyes. The world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine called Tang was so powerful that he had ambushed Xia Ho with a strong murderous intent. However, he had failed to kill Xia Ho on the spot. After witnessing this earth-shattering battle, Ning Ke finally had a clear understanding of Xia Ho's strength. He was more and more aware that he still had a long way to go if he wanted to take revenge. However, he didn't feel any fear or depression in his heart. Instead, he became more confident and calm, firmly believing that he would be able to kill Xia Ho with his own hands one day, because no matter how powerful Xia Ho was, he still didn't make a move against eldest brother. Even if he couldn't reach eldest brother's realm in his lifetime, as long as he was in the academy, he would have unlimited possibilities. Tang looked at Xia Ho expressionlessly and said, if you were in Tuyang City, I really wouldn't know how to kill you. But since you left Tuyang City and hid in the north of Hulan Sea with the intention of killing people and robbing the tomes of Arcane, how could I miss this opportunity to kill you? Perhaps you've already forgotten that you weren't the only one who survived the Enlightenment Doctrine. Xia Ho said, there are many people who want to kill me. Tang said, to clean up the sect, no one has a better reason to kill you than me. Xia Ho said, but you failed to kill me. Tang said, the cultivation of the Enlightenment Doctrine is about advancing forward courageously across the world. The Desolate Man tribe is never afraid of any strong enemy. You did not dare to throw that punch earlier, which means that you are already old. Old means useless. He looked at Xia Ho and continued to say indifferently, even if I can't kill you on the spot today, at least I know something. The most powerful man in the Enlightenment Doctrine in the past has now become a cowardly piece of trash, an old useless bastard who only dares to hide in his armor. How many days can a person like him survive under my fist? After a moment of silence, Xia Ho looked at Tang and said sarcastically, "Have you just finished adjusting your qi circulation?" Dun said, "You're almost there. Yi Su still needs some time to get here." "Very well." Xia Ho stretched out his hand and tore off his ragged coat, which was riddled with countless holes, revealing a bright gray armor underneath. The armor was engraved with dense black magic symbols, which were flowing with a solemn and powerful aura. Ning Ke stood beside the eldest brother and noticed that Xia Ho's aura suddenly rose after revealing the armor. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He looked at the talisman characters on the bright armor and roughly guessed that it was the powerful armor designed by Professor Huang He and made by the two senior brothers at the back of the mountain of the academy. Tang silently looked at the armor on Xia Ho's body. Suddenly, he reached into the air beside him and grasped a giant blood-colored knife. The knife was handed to him by Tang Xiaotang. Tang said, "I didn't want to use the knife because a cowardly traitor like you doesn't deserve to die under this knife. But since the armor you wear is from the academy, it would be disrespectful if I didn't use the knife." Xia Ho looked at the giant blood-colored machete and naturally recalled many scenes from many years ago. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I didn't expect that the 23-year cicada cultivation could really abandon everything in the world. He even left this knife to you." Tang had already finished regulating his qi circulation and did not say another word to him. The burning red flame between his calves suddenly burst out, and his hill-like body blasted towards Xia Ho at a terrifying speed. The two powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine were very familiar with each other's cultivation methods and fighting skills. Because of this, they could not use any means to lure the enemy or dodge. They could only collide with each other like the first tens of thousands of punches that sounded like a bell. This time the battle was not as terrible as before. The two figures collided and then separated, but it was more dangerous than before. When the wind and sand fell, Tang's left shoulder seemed to have collapsed, and blood flowed. On the other hand, Xia Ho's armor had an additional deep cut. The complicated runes were stagnant and no longer as bright as before. Instead, it had become extremely dim, as if it had been placed in the storeroom for hundreds of years and was about to scatter. Xia Ho slowly narrowed his eyes and touched the cold iron box on his waist with his right hand. Wherever his fingers touched, the rust would fall off. As one of the few powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine left in the world, Tang clearly knew how powerful this traitor was. In the entire front gate, except for his teacher who had disappeared for many years, no one dared to say that they could defeat him. Without the armor, perhaps the Enlightenment Doctrine powerhouse who had once dominated the wilderness would really come back. At this moment, Xia Ho, who was determined to use all his spirit and strength at the moment of life and death, was more dangerous than before. But Tang had waited silently in the cold region of the far north for more than 10 years, and finally had a chance to go south to kill this traitor. Of course, he would not miss this opportunity. So he held the hilt tightly and wanted to make the second cut. However, he did not make the second cut. Because a wooden Taoist sword broke through the air and fell on the solid ground between him and Xia Ho. The hiltless tail of the sword trembled slightly and made a light buzzing sound. An extremely lonely and desolate aura spread out from the wooden sword in all directions. It was as if it was not a wooden sword, but an old tree that had lived in the wilderness for many years and could collapse at any moment. Looking at the wooden sword, Tang frowned slightly and found that the proud and lonely guy went down the snow-capped peak faster than he had imagined. He could not help but wonder what had happened to make the person who had already stood at the peak of the 5 states of cultivation climb a little further in such a short period of time. Looking at the wooden sword that was as desolate as an old tree, he knew that he had lost the chance to fight with Xia Ho today because of his slight miscalculation of that person's speed. After a moment of silence, he handed the knife to his sister behind him. Tang Xiaotang put away the knife, and no one in the field could see where she had put it. Xia Ho looked at Tang Xiaotang indifferently and slowly released the aura that was sometimes rusty and sometimes as hot as molten steel. Then he silently retreated more than 100 feet out of the field. He retreated to leave a place for the field. There were very few people in the world who were qualified for Xia Ho to give up his place, but today there were many people at the foot of the mountain north of the Hulun Sea. Yi Su stood beside the wooden sword without anyone noticing when his light plain robe fluttered in the cold wind. After he pulled out the wooden sword from the ground and carried it back, the desolate and lonely aura on the wooden sword seemed to return to him. His body became a desolate old tree. This was the first time that Ning Ke saw Yi Su, the successor of Jishou Abbey. He did not know his identity at this time, but he guessed that he must be a great person. Many years later, before the final battle, he told Yi Su about their encounter at the foot of Tianqi Mountain. Many years later, Yi Su had no impression of Ning Ke at that time, but Ning Ke had a deep impression of him. I have never seen a person who can be so lonely. It seems that his feet are not standing on the ground of the human world, but another world. And he is clearly alive, but I feel that he has been dead for many years. This is not accurate. I should say that you seem to be alive and dead in my eyes at that time. I feel sorry for you. Yi Su did not know that a guy whom he regarded as a passerby was pitying him at this time. In his eyes, there was only the scholar in the old coat and worn-out shoes who did not seem to have a sense of existence. After a moment of silence, and no one knew what he was thinking, he calmly greeted the other. "Greetings, Mr. First." Eldest brother replied, "Hello." Yi Su turned his head and looked at the iron box that Xia Ho had unknowingly held in his hand. Tang's eyes also fell on the iron box. Everyone in the field looked at the iron box, except for Yi Hongyu, who looked at Yi Su with a complicated expression. Even the eldest senior brother was looking at the iron box. However, his calm and gentle gaze did not have any determination to seize it. There was only a strange curiosity. Yi Su suddenly said, "Elder Xia has taken back the tomes of arcane for Haotian Taoism. Congratulations." Tang said, "People in Haotian Taoism are still as shameless as years ago." Xia Ho said indifferently, "This has nothing to do with Haotian Taoism." Hearing this answer, Yi Su was silent. The emperor and ministers of the Tang Empire were suspicious. Xia Ho had entered the wilderness to steal the tomes of arcane and tried to kill the guy sent by the academy. He would not be able to explain to Chang and afterward. At this time, he was surrounded by people at the Hulun Sea. If he still wanted to keep his reputation and power, he could only rely on his status as a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. Yi Su congratulated him and gave him a chance to get out of trouble. He only needed to exchange the tomes of arcane for it, but Xia Ho did not accept it. Yi Su understood why he did not want to accept it. The dignified general of the Tang Empire could do such a thing. He must have made up his mind and wanted to completely cut off the past years. Moreover, the situation at the Hulun Sea was very complicated, so he still had a chance. The most important thing was that Mr. First of the Academy had not said anything. The Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane would appear in the wilderness. This was an edict issued by the great divine priest of revelation after he returned from the South Sea. No one in the world would doubt this, especially Yi Su, who knew that this must be the conclusion of the Abbey Dean. Because of this, many countries in the world sent people into the wilderness to try to enter the front gate of the devil's doctrine. In the end, Ning Ke and the others succeeded. However, those who were really qualified to steal the tomes of arcane had been secretly waiting. The tomes of arcane were cicadas. Ning Ke and the other young generation were mantises. Xia Ho was the oriole. Tang and Yi Su were the hunters. Eldest brother was nothing. In his words, he was just a passerby. However, when he passed by the Hulun Sea, there was no more story of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Everyone turned to look at the ordinary-looking scholar. Eldest brother asked Ning Ke, do you want that iron box? Ning Ke shook his head. Hearing his answer, eldest brother did not hesitate at all. He looked at the crowd and said gently, you can fight for this box if you want. We are just passing by and are in a hurry to go back to Chang'an. So we will leave first. Tomorrow is Saturday. I wish everyone and I have a good rest. I snicker. I can finally drink to my heart's content tonight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 3:14. This sentence represented the attitude of the Academy, indicating that they had no intention of participating in the fight for the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. Then why did the Academy change the location of the practice meeting to the frontier fortress of the north of Yan Kingdom? Why did the back of the mountain of the Academy send Ning Ke all the way to the north? Yi Su frowned slightly. Obviously, he did not understand the meaning of the Academy defining themselves as passers-by. He looked at eldest brother thoughtfully. Xia Ho obviously did not expect the situation to develop in this way. His thick eyebrows suddenly raised. If the Academy left, how could he, who was between the Taoism and the Devil's sect, live? Tang looked at Xia Ho and said in a low voice, I have said that you are old. Only an old and dying man will pin the opportunity to change his fate on illusory legends or things like the Tomes of Arcane. If a volume of the Tomes of Arcane can really change everything, how could the Enlightenment doctrine be destroyed? How could the Abbey Dean always be floating on the South Sea? Hearing Tang mention that his master was floating on the remote South Sea, Yi Su frowned even more. Xia Ho looked at Tang indifferently and said, if you are not interested in the Tomes of Arcane, why are you here? Tang said, my purpose here is to kill you. Yi Su did not care about the confrontation between the two powerhouses of the Devil's doctrine. Although Xia Ho was a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace, the trip to the wilderness to obtain the Tomes of Arcane had obviously shown that the general had a disloyalty to the Divine Hall, just like his disloyalty to the Tang Empire. He just quietly looked at eldest brother of the Academy. His eyes moved slowly on this scholar who had no sense of existence, as if he wanted to find out the real intention of his decision. Xia Ho slowly lowered his head and looked at the iron box in his hand. At this moment, there was a faint rainstorm-like sound of hooves coming from the Hulun Sea. The earth trembled slightly. Countless of the most powerful black-armored cavalry of the Tang Empire galloped from the south. The cavalry spread across the winter wilderness like an endless black tide. It was extremely shocking. Then, hundreds of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace in black armor with golden talisman roared from the east of the wilderness. In a very short time, they arrived at the Hulun Sea. They were silent and solemn, but showed a sense of sacredness and inviolability. When the two cavalrymen came to the Hulun Sea, they set up their respective formations and silently stationed their horses on the ice. However, the cavalrymen did not get off their saddles. They still sat on their horses and maintained the attitude of charging at any time. An oppressive and tense atmosphere enveloped the shore of the Hulun Sea at the foot of Tianqi Mountain. In the eyes of the world, the Tang Empire's black-armored cavalry and the West Hill Divine Palace's papal cavalrymen were undoubtedly the two most powerful and terrifying cavalrymen. However, due to historical, political, and religious factors, these two cavalrymen had never confronted each other on the battlefield, at least not in history. Today, these two cavalries suddenly left the Central Plains and went deep into the cold lake of the wilderness, shouldering the task of providing support. They were an important part of the fight for the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. Could it be that they were finally going to have a big battle today? The heavy armored cavalry with amazing speed and terrifying charging force had always been a nightmare for all kinds of cultivators on the battlefield. That was because the carefully cast thick armor could allow the warhorses and cavalrymen to completely ignore the attacks of flying swords and the like. At this time, these people standing at the foot of the mountain north of the Hulun Sea were the strongest in the world. Of course, they were not ordinary cultivators who would easily die on the battlefield. Even in the face of the black armored cavalry, they still maintained their calmness and confidence. However, even if they were grand cultivators at the peak of the knowing destiny state, they were not willing to continuously collide with the heavy armored cavalry in the wilderness. This was because, whether it was the historical records of the West Hill scriptures or the records of the opening battles of the Tang Empire, there were stories of cavalry generals who went crazy and used hundreds of precious heavy armored cavalrymen to kill powerhouses at the knowing destiny state. The fight for the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane finally came from the dark corner to the light of the world, with the cavalry gathering like dark clouds and black tides. It could no longer be hidden. Looking at the black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire by the Hulun Sea, the gentle smile on the face of the eldest brother of the academy finally disappeared. He looked at Xia Ho and asked softly, "General, do you want to rebel?" Yi Su lowered his head and said softly, "Elder Xia wants to betray Haotian Taoism and return to the embrace of the devil's doctrine." The voices of these two people were very calm and soft. However, they represented the Tang Empire and Haotian Taoism, the two most powerful forces in the world. No matter how powerful Xia Ho was and how loyal the northeast border military of the Tang Empire was, if he was abandoned by both parties at the same time, he would only die. Xia Ho said after a moment of silence, "I am indeed old. The tomes of arcane are useless to you, so you don't have to care. But it is useful to me. At least I hope it can be useful to me, so I care very much." Then he looked at Yi Su and said expressionlessly, "I am a visiting professor of West Hill, but also a general of the Tang Empire. I am a man of the secular world, so I have to borrow the power of the secular world. Today, neither you nor the Tang Empire have the confidence to keep me here. Mr. First will not intervene, so this tomes of arcane must be taken away by me." Eldest brother seemed to have thought of something and sighed, "Why won't I intervene?" Xia Ho said indifferently, "Because I will present the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane to the Emperor of the Tang Empire. Today, in front of everyone, I ask Mr. First to be my witness. According to the rules set by the headmaster of the academy, this is a political matter, and no one from the academy can interfere." As a general of the Tang Empire, he left his station without an imperial edict. Now, he even ordered more than 1,000 black armored cavalry to enter the wilderness. No matter how one looked at it, it was close to rebellion. However, if Xia Ho really presented the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane to the Emperor of the Tang Empire, then all these actions could be found a relatively reasonable explanation. If the imperial court of the Tang Empire accepted the tomes of arcane, then this matter would become a political matter. According to the strict orders of the headmaster of the academy, no matter how unwilling the people in the academy were, they had to remain silent and even secretly help. Today, by the Hulun Sea, if eldest brother did not intervene, Yi Su and Tang, as world wayfarers of the Taoism and Diabolism sects, would not act together. Then, Xia Ho, who was protected by thousands of cavalry, would undoubtedly have the best opportunity. Eldest brother sighed and said, "After doing so many things, you just want to take a look at the tomes of arcane?" Xia Ho said indifferently, "I have to take a look before I give up." Eldest brother fell silent and said nothing more. Thus, there was silence. The wind by the Hulun Sea was like a knife cutting the ground and people's cheeks. It was somewhat oppressive and cold, as if the wind did not know where to fall. No one knew how this battle for the tomes of arcane would end. At this moment, a voice rang out. "If the general wants to see the tomes of arcane, then why did you snatch my box?" Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at Xia Ho curiously and confusedly. His eyes were bright and clear, and his expression was innocent. But in fact, there was great malice hidden in them. He wanted to see Xia Ho's disappointed look and vomit blood. Except for Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu who understood what he meant, the rest felt that his question was a little meaningless. The Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane was naturally in the iron box. Otherwise, why would Xia Ho be willing to withstand the two great mountains of the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy for that box? Yi Su glanced at Xia Ho coldly. He thought that although the Ming hand scroll had been lost for a long time and he had not seen it personally, Xia Ho had it for a long time and must have found out what was in the box in some way. Eldest brother did not enter the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, but for some reason, he seemed to believe Xia Ho's words. There was a hint of a smile in his gentle and clean eyes. He looked at Xia Ho and asked, "Yes, why?" Xia Ho looked at the two brothers of the academy and said indifferently, "Mr. First, Mr. 13, do you think that you can disturb me with a casual word? I will definitely not misjudge the aura of the thing in the iron box." The iron box was very ordinary, but it was very thick and well sealed. There were faint rust marks on the surface, and it also had the smooth metallic luster that Xia Ho's fingers had rubbed on it. It was impossible to tell what was in it from its weight and feel. However, Xia Ho could clearly feel the aura of the thing in the box. The aura was so familiar and made him feel awe. This kind of awe originated from the deepest part of his sense of perception, as if it was an instinctive fear and respect. He believed that among all the people present, only he, the old man of the Enlightenment doctrine, could clearly feel the aura of the thing in the box. Other than the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane that led to the establishment of the Enlightenment doctrine, what else in this world could make him instinctively feel fear and respect? He wanted to get close to it but did not dare to get too close to it. The iron box opened with a click. There was no Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, not even a piece of paper. There was only a box of dim ashes mixed with some bone chips that had not completely melted. He was a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, and his strong hands were as steady as a rock even when he was holding a giant tripod. However, at this moment, he began to tremble just by holding a small iron box. His face became more and more solemn, like black iron. Xia Ho stared at the ashes in the box and remained silent for a long time. His silkworm-like eyebrows no longer had a trace of anxiety. He raised and frowned and then calmed down again. His thick blood-like lips were slightly pale, and after a long time, he squeezed out a voice that sounded like metal rubbing against each other. "What is this?" Ning Ke looked at his face and said, "This is the ashes of Master Lotus." Hearing the words, Master Lotus, both Yi Su and Tang's expressions changed slightly. Even eldest brother could not help but look at the ashes in the box. He wondered what these children had encountered in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Ning Ke stared at Xia Ho's face. He faintly guessed that Xia Ho should be related to the ghost-like old monk. Xia Ho just stared at the ashes in the box. Ever since he heard the words, Master Lotus, he had remained absolutely still like a statue. There was no depressed expression on his face. Instead, it was extremely strange, as if he was crying yet not crying. After a long time, the strange expression on Xia Ho's face gradually disappeared. A deep and bitter smile appeared on his face. He looked at the ashes in the box and sighed softly. His knuckles that were holding the iron box suddenly turned pale, as if he was exerting force. However, after a while, he gave up this action and said indifferently, "Since it is the ashes of a senior sublime being, then I will bury it for him." The situation had developed to this point and taken a turn. No one would have thought that the iron box that Ning Ke and the others took out from the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which Xia Ho believed to contain the tomes of arcane, actually contained a handful of ashes. There was a dead silence in the field. Eldest brother looked at Xia Ho and sighed, "Why?" Previously, when Xia Ho clearly had the intention to retreat, but still forced himself to fight, eldest brother had sighed and said, "Why?" Now he repeated it again, and it was still slow and long, full of regret. Xia Ho silently looked at the ashes in the box and murmured, "Yes, why?" Whether it was the 7 tomes of arcane or the 32-petal lotus, whether it was Xia Ho who did not want to continue to struggle between light and darkness with various identities, or whether it was his teacher Lotus who calmly and joyfully walked between light and darkness in search of liberation, they could only turn into a handful of emotionless ashes in the end. However, before turning into ashes, people always had to fight for these things and certain ideas. If one were to ask why it was so, one could only sigh and say, "Why is life so bitter? I have been coughing for 2 days for no reason. My chest hurts like hell, but it's okay. Tomorrow I will fly to Shanghai for the annual meeting. I will strive to constantly update. Watch my performance. I will work harder when I go home." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 315. Xia Ho left. He held the casket full of ashes and walked toward the shore of the Hulun Sea. There, countless powerful subordinates who were loyal to him welcomed his return. However, his figure was so lonely and even a little stooped. He no longer had the demeanor of a domineering and unparalleled general. Yi Su silently watched the figure gradually disappearing by the lake. He knew that this person was useless. This famous general had been swinging between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire in the first half of his life. He had unreservedly offered his loyalty and meritorious deeds to both sides in exchange for supreme glory and background. Today, he had thrown away all these things that he had gone through countless hardships and even countless gravitational tribulations in exchange for the tomes of arcane. However, in the end, he only got a handful of ashes. After this, he would definitely suffer a strong backlash from the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire. Therefore, he had to be useless. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the 2 great divine priests of revelation and judgment would probably feel sorry for abandoning an important figure in the Tang Empire. However, Yi Su came from the Jishou Abbey. He did not care about these secular struggles. However, because of this, he subconsciously glanced at the silent girl. He saw that the girl's red dress was messy and ragged. He did not look worried because of her injuries. Instead, he frowned because of her youthful and graceful body. Because of his frown, Yi Hongyu's beautiful cheeks became paler. She had been staring at Yi Su since he came from the top of the snow-capped peak. Neither Xia Ho's iron box nor eldest brother of the academy could make her look away. However, Yi Su did not look at her. Until this moment, he finally looked at her. However, his eyes were filled with disgust. This fact made her feel extremely painful. Ning Ke noticed that her expression was a little strange. He followed her gaze and saw the man with a sword floating like a ghost. He thought that he had guessed the truth. He lowered his voice and asked, "Old lover?" Yi Hongyu slowly turned her head and glanced at him emotionlessly. She said, "I will kill you." Ning Ke quietly took half a step behind eldest brother and said proudly, "No one can kill me now." Tang Xiaotang interrupted, "Don't talk nonsense. That is her brother." Ning Ke realized that he had misunderstood and smiled apologetically at Yi Hongyu. Tang, the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, was Tang Xiaotang's elder brother, and the guy with the wooden sword was Yi Hongyu's elder brother. Ning Ke thought that old Master Haotian was indeed unfair to both the brother and sister, who were cultivation geniuses. Then he remembered that he had sincerely wished that the girls Chen Pipi fell in love with would have the fiercest elder brother in the world. Now it seemed that if Chen Pipi and Yi Hongyu did not have any ill-fated relationship in their childhood, would they develop a story with this girl from the Devil's Doctrine named Tang Xiaotang? As he was thinking about these meaningless things, he heard eldest brother say, "Youngest brother, let's go." Ning Ke liked to be called youngest brother very much. Of course, he was not called by Chen Pipi or seventh sister, but by eldest brother or second brother, because this title gave him a sense of security that he liked the most. He was the youngest brother of the academy, so if something happened, such as when he was about to be smashed into a pulp by Xiao's big fist, eldest brother or second brother would definitely help him. This was undoubtedly the best thing in the world, so he answered very straightforwardly, "Got it, eldest brother." Yi Su suddenly looked at them and said, "It seems that Mr. First doesn't want to see us." Eldest brother looked at him quietly for a long time and said very slowly and seriously, "As a disciple of the academy, of course I hate you Taoist priests. Although I don't worship youngest uncle as much as Jun Mo, I also hate you." Yi Su did not expect that this extremely clean and gentle scholar would say that he hated Haotian Taoism so directly and straightforwardly. He could not help but keep silent for a long time, and then slightly bowed and said, "Thank you, Mr. First, for taking care of youngest brother these years." Eldest brother shook his head and did not accept his thanks. He pointed to Ning Ke beside him and said, "This is my youngest brother. As for Pippi, you don't have to be so polite, because he is my younger brother, not yours." Tang suddenly bowed to him very seriously and said, "From now on, I will count on Mr. First." Yi Su slightly frowned and did not understand what he meant. Did the remnants of the devil's doctrine still not give up and still want to have a relationship with the Chan and Academy? Tang Xiaotang looked at Ning Ke and childishly said, "Ning Ke, I will come to play with you in the future." The white furry wolf arched its head out of the arms of the girl from the devil's doctrine, stared at Ning Ke and let out a low growl, which probably meant that if Ning Ke dared to invite her, she would definitely bite him into a bone stick. Eldest brother looked at Ning Ke in a daze. Ning Ke innocently spread out his hands, indicating that there was nothing between him and the girl from the devil's doctrine. Eldest brother did not say anything more. He tightened the ladle around his waist and walked out of the field. Ning Ke tightened the luggage behind him and followed him out of the field. However, after a few steps, he jumped back to Mo Shanshan and said with a smile, "Let's go together, okay?" Mo Shanshan's slightly round face was slightly red and she nodded without a trace. The figures of the three disappeared under the winter sun of the wilderness. It was quiet by the Hulun Sea. Tang looked into the distance and said, "He ranks first in the academy and never fights. No one dares to fight against him. I have always thought that there is a gap between us. But what if he is not good at fighting? It is a pity that no one dares to try." Yi Su looked in the same direction as him and said, "I tried." Tang frowned slightly as if he did not expect this answer. He looked at him and said, "And the result?" Yi Su calmly said, "I fought, but he did not." It was a very simple description and a very clear result. So Tang fell silent again. Yi Su looked at Yi Hongyu and said, "You have done well these 2 years. I saw you break the realm on the snow cliff. But it is not good for you to be too obsessed with some things." After saying this, he was ready to leave. Yi Hongyu did not expect to hear such a warm comment. Although Yi Su's tone was extremely cold and calm, the word "not bad" was the warmest thing for her. She looked at her brother's back and called out sadly, "Brother." Yi Su did not look back and said, "You can call me brother when Pippi returns to the monastery." Looking at the lonely back gradually disappearing, Yi Hongyu suddenly realized that it was not that she could not catch up with her brother, but that her brother had never thought of letting her stand on his shoulder. Was that person really that important? Tang Xiaotang looked at her and said sympathetically, "Although you are sometimes very annoying, especially when you are fighting, it is really pitiful to be left behind by your own brother." Yi Hongyu's face was as cold as frost and she ignored her. After all, Tang Xiaotang was still young. She opened her innocent eyes and asked curiously, "Is Pippi your brother? Otherwise, why would your brother be so angry with you because of him? Also, why did you bully that guy?" Yi Hongyu said tiredly, "That guy is the damn fatty that Ning Ke mentioned in the valley." Tang Xiaotang covered her mouth with her little hand in surprise, but her hand covered the beast's tail. She said, "A cultivation genius in knowing destiny state was bullied by you and had to run away from home. You are so powerful." Yi Hongyu did not know how to respond to this kind of praise. If she had known that the bullying and the hidden dark thoughts would eventually lead to her brother's indifference to her, she would never have done this. Tang looked at her and suddenly said, "Don't try to learn from your brother. Even if you are qualified to stand on his shoulder, you will become a living dead without a smell like him." Yi Hongyu said scornfully, "How can a remnant of the devil's doctrine like you understand this kind of Taoism?" Tang said expressionlessly, "But I know that if he leaves you here, I can kill you at any time." Taoism and the devil's doctrine could not coexist. Yi Hongyu was the Grand Master of the Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, so Tang had no reason not to kill her. However, for some unknown reason, or perhaps because the girl watching Yi Su's back was just an inconspicuous and pitiful little sister who had lost her brother, he just silently left with his sister. Yi Hongyu stood there alone, thinking of her brother's lonely figure. After a while, she also walked slowly towards the papal cavalrymen of the Divine Hall by the Hulun Sea. There was no one at the foot of the mountain that was previously extremely tense and murderous. The people of the world came for the tomes of arcane, but in the end, they got nothing. All they saw was a box of the ashes of their predecessors. The dim winter sun shone on the cold wilderness. As the cold wind blew on the winter lake, the light became more and more desolate, making people feel lost. Parting was always bitter, but Ning Ke did not feel this, because he was sitting beside a wilted poplar forest with eldest brother, warming himself by a fire. There were some dried potatoes dug out from the ground buried under the fire, and there was a faint aroma. A horse neighed in the distance, sounding extremely excited and joyful. Ning Ke looked towards the source of the sound and saw the big black horse shaking its head like a madman beside the half-warm stream that was not completely frozen. Mo Shanshan was grooming the big black horse, and her entire head and face were wet because of the big black horse's disturbance. However, it was obvious that what she said outside the palace's tent was not all lies. She really liked Ning Ke's big black horse, so she was not angry. Instead, she giggled and showed a rare girlish expression. "Eldest brother, you are really admirable. You actually found this silly horse in such a large wilderness, and even drove it all the way from the north to here. How can it listen to you?" Ning Ke looked at the scholar beside the fire, and his eyes revealed an irrepressible expression of shock and admiration. Eldest brother took a thick piece of firewood and slowly stirred the fire. He explained gently, "Teacher raises an old yellow bull, and I often deal with it, so they probably think it is more trustworthy. Speaking of which, youngest brother, your big black horse is not bad. In the future, if that yellow bull returns to the back of the mountain to retire, it may be able to pull teacher's carriage." Ning Ke scratched his head and suddenly asked, "Eldest brother, you are a very great person. Although the two guys we met just now were not as great as you, they are also very great people. So there is a problem that I have been thinking about." Eldest brother looked up at him and asked curiously, "What problem? How can people like Yi Su, the successor of Jishou Abbey, be so stubborn as to believe that the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane is in the iron box? Tang is the successor of the devil's doctrine, why does he also believe it? If people like them are sure that the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane will definitely appear here, then why has no one found it?" Ning Ke looked at eldest brother and asked seriously, "Where is the tomes of arcane?" "Running to the airport immediately." Tears in my eyes. The plane actually landed at Rainbow Bridge, but the hotel is in Zhangjiang. My comrade on the subway, I will be with you for a long time again. My comrade on dinner, I will not see you for a long time again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. It was very smooth, but in fact it was not smooth at all. This was because eldest senior brother's rhythm was too slow. He seemed to think for a long time before he spoke, making sure that there were no mistakes or misunderstandings before he spoke. Moreover, This hypnotic rhythm could very well divert the topic to another place. Ning Ke asked about the whereabouts of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane. In the end, after a while, it turned into him reporting to the eldest brother about his whereabouts after leaving Chang and then coming to the wilderness. From the academy students in the Blue Water Battalion to the girls from the Great River Kingdom by the Warm Stream, from the attack of the horse gang controlled by Xiahou to the bullying in the palace, from the night of killing the Psyche Master Lin Ling of the Northeast Border Military, to the sniping of Prince Long Qing and the bloody battle with the Tao Addict, to entering the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and encountering the mottled sword marks left by youngest uncle and the ghost. Like old monk among the bones and corpses. Eldest brother maintained a calm expression throughout the narration. Even when he heard about the Haran sword style left by youngest uncle in the world, he only sighed with emotion. Only when he heard that Ning Ke met Master Lotus in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine did his expression change a little. Eldest brother looked at Ning Ke sincerely and said, "I didn't know that the confinement array made by youngest uncle's sword style was so powerful. Even the headmaster didn't know that Senior Lotus was still alive. If he knew, I wouldn't have dared to let you enter the front gate alone. I wanted to let you cultivate and sharpen your skills, but I didn't expect you to encounter so many dangers. Youngest brother, I'm really sorry." At this moment, Ning Ke finally confirmed that this trip to the wilderness was arranged by the academy. The headmaster of the academy and eldest brother had indeed been secretly watching him. However, it was obvious that the seemingly omnipotent and omniscient teacher and eldest brother, who was so strong that no one dared to challenge by the bonfire, were not really omniscient. At least they didn't know that there was a Master Lotus hidden in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, who could draw out Xiahou's inner demons even if he was turned into ashes. Thinking of the dangerous encounter beside the pile of bones and the ghost-like old monk who lowered his head and gnawed on the girl's flesh, Ning Ke couldn't help but burst into tears. He said with grief and anger, "Eldest brother, you are too irresponsible. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I was busy picking up those things in the snow-capped peak and didn't expect it." Eldest brother lowered his head in shame and took out 4 black iron arrows from somewhere in his right hand and handed them over. Ning Ke took the 4 iron arrows and touched the fine and complicated Fu characters on them with his fingers. He gasped in shock. After comprehending Tao and breaking the realm by the Daming Lake, he had shot a total of 4 primordial 13 arrows in order to kill Prince Long Qing and deal with the Tao Addict, Yi Hongyu. The 4 talisman arrows either pierced through Prince Long Qing's chest and went deep into the snow cliff, or brushed past Yi Hongyu's shoulder and disappeared into the clouds. He had thought that he would never be able to find them again in this life. He felt regretful when he thought of the hard work of his senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain of the academy. But now they were all back in his hands. Eldest brother. How did he know where the 4 talisman arrows were and how did he pick them up? These arrows are good. How many younger brothers in the back mountain contributed? Eldest brother looked at the talisman arrows in his hand and asked. All the senior brothers and sisters have done their best. Ning Ke thought that those guys who played the zither, played chess, and admired the flowers also came to the lake to cheer for him. Did they contribute? Eldest brother felt a little regretful and said, "It's a pity that I wasn't there at that time. Maybe the arrows could be better." Ning Ke was born to take advantage of the situation and move closer to eldest brother. He showed a sincere expression and said seriously, "Then let's try again when we return to Changpan." Eldest brother was startled and then said honestly, "Okay." Ning Ke knew that eldest brother must have seen through his intention, but he did not expose it. He did not even tease him and just agreed. In the face of such sincerity, Ning Ke actually felt a little shy, which was rare. Speaking of which, the calligraphy addict is really nice to you. Eldest brother, why are you talking about this? You should thank her. I know. Eldest brother dug out a few sweet potatoes from the ashes under the fire with a branch and said, "Eat them. They are very fragrant. Leave these 2 for the calligraphy addict and your big black horse." Don't touch them. Ning Ke reached out to touch the sweet potato and was almost scalded. He was a little angry and said, "It's okay to leave one for Shanshan, but how can the big black horse be qualified to eat it?" Eldest brother was not used to his words. He thought that whether it was the big yellow bull raised by the headmaster of academy or the big white goose raised by Jun Mo, they usually ate with everyone. Why couldn't the big black horse raised by youngest brother? He shook his head and said, "Speaking of which, when I first entered the mountain when I was a child, I refused to eat meat because I always felt that everything has a spirit. Later, I was beaten by my teacher with a stick and saw the yellow bull eating meat, so I was forced to come here." Ning Ke listened to eldest brother's long-winded memories while fighting with the hot sweet potato. He suddenly came to his senses and raised his head, shouting angrily, "Senior brother, why did you change the topic again?" Eldest brother looked at him blankly and asked, "What did I change the topic?" If Xiahou mistakenly thought that the iron box was the tomes of arcane because of Lotus, then what about Tang and Yisu? Tang did not come for the tomes of arcane. He wanted to kill Xiahou and clean up the devil's doctrine. What about Yisu? Ning Ke asked. Eldest brother scratched his head and said with some uncertainty, "It seems that he came for me." Ning Ke shook his head after a moment of silence and said, "It's not that simple. The great divine priest of revelation said that the arcane would appear at the front gate of the devil's doctrine, north of the Hulun Sea. Since these supermundane people came here, they must believe the great divine priest of revelation's words. What good does the great divine priest of revelation do for him and the divine hall by making such an untrue oracle?" He looked up at eldest brother and said, "Then where is the tomes of arcane?" Eldest brother looked at him and kept silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Do you really want to know?" Ning Ke said, "Everyone in the world wants to know." Eldest brother said, "But even if you know, how can it help you?" Ning Ke stared at him and said seriously, "Senior brother, do you know that curiosity can kill a cat?" Eldest brother shook his head and said seriously, "This, I really don't know." Then he looked up at the grey winter sky of the wilderness and said curiously, "In fact, I have never understood why the great divine priest of revelation would make such an oracle. Now that I think about it, is it also some kind of lucky chance to have a curious younger brother?" After saying this, he took out the old book from his waist and handed it to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke took the old book in a daze and vaguely understood something. But he could not believe his own judgment at all. He looked down at the ordinary cover of the old book in his hand. After a long silence, he finally plucked up the courage to open the first page. His fingers were trembling because of nervousness and excitement, and the pages were flipped noisily. It was like the sound of water that once sounded by the pool on the mountainside of the snow-capped peak. This world did not know much about eldest brother of the academy. They only knew that the scholar in an old coat and shabby shoes always looked very clean no matter how much dust was on him. They only knew that the scholar was calm and happy. He loved to linger by the mountain stream and pool. He always had a water ladle tied to his waist. When he was thirsty, he would drink from it. He always held a book in his hand and often read it. No one knew that the book in the scholar's hand was the tomes of arcane. The Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane that had been lost in the wilderness for many years and had never appeared in the world. It was quiet by the bonfire for a long time. In fact, Ning Ke did not dare to read the old book seriously because he did not know what would happen after reading it. After a long time, he raised his head with difficulty and asked in a trembling voice, "This tomes of arcane has always been in your hands?" Eldest brother admitted honestly, "After observing the clouds at dusk that year and breaking the realm, the headmaster has always given it to me for safekeeping." Ning Ke gasped and then realized that the number of times he had gasped today seemed to be more than the number of times he had gasped in the past decade. He could not help but lament, no wonder senior brother sighed at Xiahou's suffering. The Ming hand scroll of the 7 tomes of arcane had always been in the hands of eldest brother of the academy. However, no one in the world knew about it. Countless people were greedy for it and fought for it with their lives. Some people, like Xiaohu, did not hesitate to give up everything in the first half of their lives. Why did he have to suffer? Why was life so bitter? Fortunately, Ning Ke was now the youngest brother of the academy. For the academy, all kinds of bitterness in life were usually the bitterness of others. It's here. I'm tired. I can't drink too much at night. I need to write. Besides, it's the middle of the month. Everyone has a new monthly ticket. Hurry up and vote. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 317. When Ning Ke gently opened the old book by the bonfire, an aura slowly emerged from the yellowish paper. This aura was calm and serene, as if it did not belong to the human world. In a flash, it floated up to the sky, as if it was going to disperse into the winter clouds and never return to the page. Because this aura was too calm and tranquil, it couldn't repel anything in the winter wilderness. However, it didn't fuse with anything, not even those soft cloud threads. This was not resistance or rejection, but rather, it maintained its silent nature and didn't even want to come into contact with it. Without contact, there would naturally be no mutual effect. It was still the quiet winter clouds and the frost forest in the wilderness. Even the cultivator with the most powerful psyche power in the world could not discover the aura emitted by this book. However, the sky could. Because the blue or gray sky was a mirror, an omnipresent mirror that belonged to Haotian. Therefore, it could clearly reflect the appearance of the aura. The low-hanging clouds in the winter sky were like old cotton mattresses that had absorbed enough water. After the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane was opened, they quickly reacted. The thick clouds twisted and tore violently. Then, they entangled and swallowed each other. In the end, they separated from each other and turned into countless independent clouds. Among the tens of thousands of clouds, the distant blue sky was revealed. It was because of this background that these clouds had a clear sense of suspension and became countless silent stones floating in the air. Ning Ke looked up at the cloud stones in the sky and thought of the hundreds of millions of jagged rocks in the Great Blockage Formation outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He seemed to understand and feel something in his heart. He sighed with emotion and remained silent. Somewhere in the black wilderness, Yi Su was looking at the sky and observing the clouds. His hands were behind his back, as if he had already grasped the thin wooden sword. His head was raised high, as if he had already leaned against the thin wooden sword. His clothes were very thin, as if they would flutter with the cold wind in the wilderness. The expression on his face was also very thin. It was a kind of thinness formed by a kind of self-deprecating indifference. Another place in the black wilderness. Dun was also looking up at the sky and observing the clouds. His hands were hanging by his side, tightly gripping them like two firm stones. His head was raised high, like a boulder on the edge of a cliff that was about to fall. His fur coat was very thick. No matter how the cold wind blew on the wilderness, it did not leave a trace. The expression on his face was also very sincere. It was a kind of calmness formed from understanding the truth. Another black wasteland. Xia Ho gently lifted the reins and slowly raised his right hand, signaling the dark armored cavalry around him to stop. Then, he raised his head to look at the tens of thousands of clouds in the sky that looked like suspended rocks. He could not help but recall the mountain gate that he could see day and night many years ago. He thought of many things, and a few traces of pain flashed across his steely face. At this moment, there were many people in the wilderness. They did not have the ability to come into contact with the tranquil aura that leaked out from the tomes of arcane, but they could see the strange phenomenon in the sky. They could see the independent clusters of clouds that did not merge with the heaven and earth. So they were shocked, and then silent. The oracle of the great divine priest of revelation was true. The Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane appeared in the wilderness. Regrettably, people could only look at the sky and observe the clouds to know that the tomes of arcane had appeared, but they did not know where in the wilderness the tomes of arcane had appeared. Senior brother, since the tomes of arcane are in your hands, why didn't you tell them before? They didn't ask me, Anne. I really didn't want to tell them. That makes sense. You can't tell anyone except the people of the academy. Yes, if I told them, they would definitely come to rob me. I don't want to fight with them. I've said that I'm not good at fighting. Xia Ho and the others are very strong. It's very hard to defeat them. Ning Ke noticed that eldest brother did not say it was very hard, but just hard. He could not help but laugh after being startled. Youngest brother, what are you laughing at? Nothing. I just think that eldest brother is really a wonderful person. Oh. What's so wonderful about it? Everything is wonderful. Well, I don't really understand this sentence. Eldest brother. Youngest brother. How do we close this tomes of arcane? We can't always leave it open. The reaction of the sky is so strong. What if someone really finds the traces and chases after us? There are usually 3 steps to close the tomes. First, eldest brother. Youngest brother. There's something strange about this tomes of arcane. I took a look at it and my sense of perception was so shocked that I want to vomit blood. That's why I want to close it. Now that I'm talking to you, I feel like vomiting blood even more. So can I trouble you to help me? Oh, I see. Eldest brother. Youngest brother. Why don't you talk? Didn't you ask me to help? When Jun Mo was young, he got angry easily when I talked to him. At that time, he was like you just now, saying that he wanted to vomit blood. The so-called help, of course, is to shut up. I'm talking about the book. Of course, I'll remember the precautions when talking to you in the future. Oh, I see. A hand reached out from the reddish firelight. It was eldest brother's hand. The cover of the old book was extremely heavy for Ning Ke, and it was mixed with infinite pressure. Just a glance at it would make his sense of perception shake and break. However, it did not show any abnormality in eldest brother's hands, and it was closed with a gentle lift. As the pages were closed, the tens of thousands of clouds in the sky gradually dispersed and merged with each other. They returned to the gloomy and continuous stretch of wet cotton wool, covering the whole wilderness. Those powerhouses in the wilderness who sensed the celestial phenomenon and looked up at the clouds were silent for a long time. Then, with mixed emotions, they left silently. It was almost dusk. A very faint red sunset shone through the clouds and shone on the cold forest in the wilderness. The warm stream, which was like a young girl's hair, reflected countless golden threads. The big black horse jumped like a clumsy monster sparrow by the stream. The beautiful young talisman master in a white coat chased after it. The color of the bonfire by the forest was getting darker and darker. Eldest brother put the leftover potato skin at his feet and asked slowly, "Did you find the Haoran sword?" Ning Ke did not find the Haoran sword that belonged to youngest uncle in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. But he knew what eldest brother really meant. So he nodded and said, "It's not the real sword, but I found it." Eldest brother looked very relieved and happy. He sighed and said, "That's good." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke asked very seriously, "Senior brother, why did you choose me to inherit youngest uncle's mantle?" The Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane had always been in the academy. Of course, the academy would not compete with other sections. It could only be for the mottled sword marks left by youngest uncle and the aura that wanted to return to the sect. Those sword marks and aura represented youngest uncle's spirit and mantle. They had been wandering outside because the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was covered. Decades later, the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was opened according to the heavens. It was at this time that the Empire and the Academy changed the plan for autumn practice and asked Ning Kai to lead the team to the wilderness. Now he naturally understood why. However, there were so many senior brothers and senior sisters in the back mountain of the Academy. He had the lowest state and the least experience. He had never met the headmaster of the Academy. Naturally, he was not the most favored one. So why did he inherit youngest uncle's mantle? Because this is your lucky chance, youngest brother. Eldest brother looked at him with a gentle expression. His clean eyes seemed to be able to see through Ning Kai's heart. Ning Kai murmured and repeated, lucky chance. What is lucky chance? In headmaster's words, it is those inexplicable but natural karma. However, headmaster doesn't believe in lucky chance, but I do. In my opinion, Master Lotus, the divine hall for 1,000 years, the desolate man's invasion of the south are all the same. Youngest brother, you are the same. Eldest brother said, you wanted to enter the academy, so you entered. His Majesty needed you to come to the wilderness, so you came. You could feel youngest uncle's aura, so you went. When night came, the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which had been sealed for decades, opened. You were there, so you entered. There's no need to use logic to explain it, and it can't be explained. But it has its own cause and effect. So this is your lucky chance, not mine, not Jun Mo's or the other junior brothers and sisters. Ning Kai raised his head and looked at the vast snow-capped mountain in the distance. He thought about how he had left Chang, and when he was young and grew up in the south of Min Mountain. 10 years later, he came to the north of Min Mountain. As the youngest disciple of the academy, he inherited youngest uncle's mantle. It seemed that something had really played a role in this. After an unknown period of time, he finally got rid of the inexplicable melancholy, and when he turned around, he met his eldest senior brother's gaze that was as clean as pure water. He couldn't help but be slightly stunned, and then he felt slightly sad. When he mentioned the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine to eldest brother, he did not mention the most secretive part. This was the reason for his sadness. When he met eldest brother for the first time in the academy last spring, he was afraid of eldest brother's cleanliness and the aura that made people unable to hide their sincerity. Now that he knew that eldest brother was his eldest brother and would definitely treat him well, he naturally did not fear him anymore. However, he felt more struggling and painful. Should he tell eldest brother about joining the devil? It was almost night and the stars were already out. Darkness was about to cover the entire wilderness. The bonfire by the frost forest looked brighter and brighter. As the winter wind blew, the flickering flames illuminated Ning Kai's face. Ning Kai looked down at the bonfire in front of him. After a long silence, he finally made up his mind and said in a slightly tense voice, eldest brother, did youngest uncle join the devil? Was that why he was punished by heaven? Eldest brother looked at him quietly and said, yes. Ning Kai raised his head and asked, then I inherited youngest uncle's mantle. Eldest brother said with a smile, the Haran sword has the Great Spirit, and the Great Spirit has the Great Spirit. I have also learned the Haran sword. Ning Kai shook his head and said, no. Eldest brother seemed to know what he was struggling about. He waved his hand to stop him and said with a smile, youngest brother, if you really don't know how to face some things, then you can talk to the teacher about it in the future. At a certain resort, I'm quite lucky. While many authors can't go online, I can. I can hold on. I'll definitely not be disconnected tomorrow. It's just that I'm not good at writing. If my writing is a little rough, please forgive me. Then, I strongly recommend Skeleton Fairy's new book, Templar. The book number is 233-6338. I'm also very curious as to what kind of story this hot-blooded fellow will come up with in the Xianxia world. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 318. Ning Ke vaguely understood the meaning of eldest brother's words, but he was not sure if he really understood. His mind became a little confused and he fell silent. Eldest brother looked at his expression and guessed his mood at this time. He smiled and changed the topic, saying, "Youngest brother, I don't know if you are willing to exchange your big black umbrella with me now." Hearing this, Ning Ke recalled the day when he first entered the academy and met a scholar in an old robe at the entrance of the alley. The scholar said that he was willing to exchange the water ladle at his waist for the big black umbrella, and he could not help laughing. At that time, he did not know that the scholar would become his eldest brother in the future. It was already late at night, and the bonfire by the frost forest was getting brighter and brighter, like a passionate red dancer dancing. Shan Shan, who rode the big black horse for a walk at dusk, came back. The big black horse trotted happily as if it was also dancing. Accompanied by the smell of roasted potatoes and the crackling sound of firewood, 3 people and 1 horse spent the night in the open space by the forest. Ning Ke and Shan Shan's injuries gradually healed, and with the warmth of the raging fire, they did not feel too sad. When they woke up the next morning, they were about to embark on the journey back to the south. Eldest brother found an old carriage and a few nooses. Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at the carriage in front of them and felt it was very strange. But thinking of eldest brother's ability, they felt relieved and did not ask anything. Only the big black horse had a very bad feeling when looking at the carriage. It probably guessed the heavy responsibility on its shoulders on the long journey back to the south. It lowered its head and kicked its hooves in annoyance. However, compared to its instinctive fear and obedience to Ning Ke, it did not dare to disobey the scholar who brought it here from the far north of Jianqi Mountain. The wheels rolled over the hard frozen ground or the loose snow, making different sounds. Accompanied by these boring sounds, and led by the big black horse's angry breath, the 3 sitting in the old carriage gradually left the cold forest and headed towards the palace of the grassland tribe in the south. The journey could be interesting or boring. Although it was inconvenient for Ning Ke to ask eldest brother about the internal cultivation problems of the academy because Shan Shan was beside him, he had enough time to ask eldest brother about the stories of the cultivation world. In the past, Ning Ke knew nothing about the cultivation world. For example, he didn't know the origin of the Devil's Doctrine, the history of the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. The academy was the legendary unknown place, and he didn't know that he was the legendary world wayfarer. Because of these things, he made a lot of jokes. He even said in front of Shan Shan that the world wayfarer was nothing. It was like giving himself a tight slap in the face. This kind of psychological trauma made him thirstily want to know the history of the cultivation world. Now that he finally had the opportunity to see all the scenes of the peak of that world through his seemingly omniscient eldest senior brother, how could he miss it? In the following days, the stories of cultivation continued in the carriage. Other than the fact that eldest brother spoke too slowly and almost fell asleep, it was a perfect homecoming trip for Ning Quebec. The grassland tribes were already close to the left tent palace. Would the Blue Water Battalion at the frontier fortress of northern Yan Kingdom be far away? If they went further south, they would enter the territory of the Tang Empire. After passing the 2 counties of Hebei and Gubei, they would see Chang'an. It was great that they could finally eat fried egg noodles again. It was great. The cultivation stories that eldest brother told Ning Ke were not secrets, at least to Mo Shan Shan, the calligraphy addict, who was also from a famous sect. Therefore, she could not stay as excited as Ning Ke for a long time. She had heard many stories many times when she was young. Looking at Ning Ke's excited expression, she sympathized with Mr. First of the academy who had to play the role of the first teacher. She was even more impressed by Mr. First's strong patience. Other than the occasional sighs, Shan Shan was also responsible for taking care of the big black horse's food and water. Most of the time, she was used to leaning against the window with her hands supporting her chin, looking at the scenery of the wilderness outside the window. The scenery of the wilderness in winter was really boring. She could not concentrate on the green grass and clear water. Therefore, in the end, she simply stared blankly. One day, Ning Ke finally noticed the girl's strange behavior. Looking at the faint sadness on her beautiful face, he was slightly stunned and asked, "Shanshan, what are you thinking about?" Now that the two of them were very familiar with each other, Shanshan was no longer used to using silence or coldness to cover up her shyness and nervousness. She did not turn her head when she heard his question, but still looked at the thick snow outside the window quietly. She said softly, "I have no brothers or sisters since I was young. I have no family. I don't know what that feeling is like." Ning Ke did not know how she became a disciple of the master of calligrapher, nor did he ask about her life. At this time, hearing her sighs, he could not help but feel a little ashamed. Then he thought of the rain in Lin 47th Street and realized that he did not know what unfulfilled wish Xiaozhuazi had other than killing Xiahou. He could not help but silently think that he was not a good choice for a friend in this life. After a moment, he got rid of this emotion and looked at Shanshan's beautiful side profile with a smile. He knew that the reason for the girl's sighs and sadness was probably related to the scenes she saw by the Hulun Sea. In terms of herself, as the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan was completely qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, and the girl from the Devil's Doctrine, Tang Xiaotang. However, the two girls each had a powerful elder brother. When those people appeared, no one would notice her existence. How would she feel? Envy, jealousy, or sadness? I used to have a family, but I never had brothers or sisters. Therefore, I don't know what it feels like to have an elder brother. But if you have the chance to go to Chang'an and see my family, you can ask her. In order to comfort her, Ning Ke smiled and said, "But if you really want to have an elder brother, I can be your elder brother. I'm not talking nonsense. Even if I can't catch up to eldest brother's state in the future, I can definitely be stronger than those two guys." When she heard the words "my family," Mo Shanshan's sparse and long eyelashes slightly trembled, like willow branches lightly brushing the surface of a lake. Only when she heard the latter part of Ning Ke's sentence did she slowly turn her head around. She silently looked at Ning Ke's familiar yet slightly unfamiliar face, and after a long period of silence, she suddenly smiled and said two words with certainty. "No." Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He scratched his head and asked, "Why not?" Mo Shanshan smiled slightly and explained very seriously, "Because you are too weak." Ning Ke looked at the girl's beautiful face and tightly pursed thin lips. His heart moved slightly, and then moved again. He thought that this sentence really hurt his self-esteem. Did he have to wear the hat of the weakest world wayfarer of the academy in history for the rest of his life? His self-esteem was extremely fragile after experiencing so many setbacks. With a bitter face, he muttered to Shanshan, "I don't believe that I can't be stronger than those two guys in the future. If you're not satisfied with this, I'll let eldest brother recognize you as his sister. I'd like to see if you can find a brother in this world who's stronger than eldest brother." Eldest brother had been looking at the two from the opposite side of the carriage. The expression on his face was very gentle, like an experienced elder looking at his younger generation. He could tell that there were many hidden meanings in the conversation between the two, but he realized that no matter who it was, in fact, they were not absolutely clear about what they wanted. After thinking for a moment, he made a decision. The reason why he made this decision, other than the standpoint of the academy itself, was mainly because he was very grateful to the girl for taking care of Ning Quebec. He liked the girl's way of doing things. This was because he had vaguely guessed something after following the headmaster of the academy to travel around all these years, and also because of the past that only belonged to him many years ago. When Shanshan heard this, she thought to herself, "What kind of status does Mr. First have in the academy have? It's fine if you and I are familiar with each other and joke around, but how can you involve Mr. First in this, not to mention asking him to accept me as his sister? Mr. First would definitely not care about such a ridiculous suggestion." But if he did not care, it would naturally be boring. How could she make Mr. First feel bored? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She glared at him fiercely, but because the girl's eyes were too loose due to her myopia, it was not scary to force her eyes to widen. Instead, it looked even more adorable. Suddenly, at this moment, eldest brother looked at her with a gentle expression, smiled and said two words with certainty. Okay. The carriage suddenly became quiet. Ning Ke looked at eldest brother with a puzzled expression. He did not understand why his joke would get such a response. Of course, he did not think that eldest brother was also joking. Because, if eldest brother was joking, would he still be eldest brother? As for Shanshan, she was even more shocked and did not know what to say. She suddenly felt a little helpless and lowered her head, using her black hair to cover the complex and joyless expression on her face. She stared at the toe of the shoe sticking out of her skirt and did not dare to move. Eldest brother laughed at their reactions and added seriously, "It's my honor." Mo Shanshan finally knew that it was true. She raised her head and looked at eldest brother with mixed feelings. She knew what kind of lucky chance it was to be able to call Mr. First brother and sister of the academy brother and sister. She also knew how much benefit it would bring to her. For a moment, she felt an inexplicable fear and sincere gratitude. But most of all, she felt warm because of his gentle gaze. Eldest brother looked at her and asked calmly, "What do you plan to do next?" Mo Shanshan sat properly and calmed herself down. She answered seriously, "I plan to meet senior sisters and junior sisters in the military camp of the Yan territory and then return to the Great River through capital Cheng and the South Jin Kingdom." Eldest brother smiled and said, "If you want to return to the Great River, you have to pass through the South Jin Kingdom. But you don't have to go through capital Cheng. After entering the Tang territory, you can travel around Chang'an for a few days. What do you think?" Mo Shanshan did not know why Mr. First suddenly invited her to Chang'an. She turned her eyes slightly and secretly glanced at Ning Quebec. No one knew what she was thinking, but her slightly round and beautiful face instantly blushed. "Are we going to his Chang'an?" She lowered her head and thought shyly. But what came out of her thin lips was something else. Her voice was even softer than the buzzing of mosquitoes in the winter wilderness. "I'm afraid that it will delay Mr. First's journey. It is indeed inconvenient to be outside. My head is about to fall off. Rub it yourself." Sigh. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.